Chapter 284. Lu Feng had once again let go of his shackles. He had once again undergone a terrifying increase in strength. At this moment, Guang Ran Tianxing's eyes shone with a startling light. Once again, he thought of the past, in that world of slaughter, that most terrifying and crazy blessing. It's the great demon. The true body of the great demon. Lu Feng no longer held back. If it had been any other time, he might have lowered his strength and only hoped to fight a hot-blooded battle. However, today, under such circumstances and with such a reason, Lu Feng no longer held back. Since his first appearance in the world had already arrived, it was time for him to reappear. He would use the most extreme violence to prove that he, Lu Feng, was the glory of the Emperor, the great demon. This was the true power of the great demon. After Lu Feng entered the perfect stage, the great demon's power had also been completely restored. The true essence of the golden color appeared. The golden and imperial colors alternated, forming an invincible body. This was the ultimate battle constitution. He has become even stronger. Guang Ran Tianxing took a deep breath. He could feel that the current Lu Feng was even more terrifying and unimaginable. This golden great demon's power was obviously much stronger than the bronze great demon's power that had appeared before. This also meant that Lu Feng had become even more terrifying. A breakthrough, a breakthrough! The power of the great demon with the golden body was infinitely enhanced and the strongest attachment. It allowed Lu Feng to once again experience the realm of looking down on everything. Powerful. This was the limit of power. It made everyone tremble in fear and submit. The most terrifying majesty and the greatest nobility were all present, deterring billions of living beings. He can actually still break through. This kind of demonic power is not something that the Lu family can inherit. What kind of fortuitous encounter did he have? How could he have such a terrifying upgrade? The limit. This has completely crossed a huge level. Is he really going to defy the heavens with such an extreme upgrade? Many existences were terrified, trembling, and going crazy. The human king bloodline was recognized as the strongest bloodline since ancient times. With such a bloodline strength, one could be called a monstrous genius. And Lu Feng with such a terrifyingly rich bloodline was absolutely an extreme monstrous genius. Extreme monstrous talent meant that the divine king had potential. As expected, the Lu family is going to recreate the greatest glory of the human monarch era in this era. The eyes of countless existences flickered. However, since they were all from the human race, they weren't too afraid of such a change. If they had to describe it, they were more than happy. After all, the human king's Lu family was not on the same level as them. Moreover, they had never thought of catching up to the human king's Lu family. No matter how powerful the human king Lu family was, they were not much of a threat to them. After all, there were only so many direct descendants of the human king Lu family. Moreover, if the human king Lu family really gave birth to a divine king with the bloodline of the human king, then the human race would definitely prosper. At that time, they would be able to obtain even more. Therefore, when they saw Lu Feng's crazy improvement, they were all pleasantly surprised. As he stood on the stage, Lu Feng closed his eyes slightly. His arms were slightly open. It seemed as if he was embracing something. Time seemed to freeze completely at this moment. It seemed as if even the nobility of time and space was about to be subdued by this emperor's might and tremble quietly for him. At the moment, there was only one person left between heaven and earth. Deities and monstrous geniuses had all become dispensable existences. Their radiance had already been overshadowed by this. Lu Feng was the only eternal existence between heaven and earth. Mu Huang's eyes were filled with complicated emotions as he watched Lu Feng. That was jealousy, that was fear, and that was madness. He was a monstrous genius, an exceptional monstrous genius. He could definitely become the 8th emperor of the Federation and the 4th massacre emperor. His glory was incomparably glorious. Anyone who saw him would have to submit. However, at this moment, he seemed like a lowly ant in front of Lu Feng. He was just a pitiful worm. In the past, he had been stronger than Lu Feng. He was a mid-level upheaval martialist, while Lu Feng was only at the peak evolution stage. Later on, he had released his bloodline and released his martial path ability. He had stood in the vast wilderness, and his power had dominated the heavens. He could even fight against any mid-level perfect stage martialist. Such a huge improvement made him worthy of being called a monstrous genius. However, he had never expected that the person before him would also improve. So much so that there was no limit to his improvement. It made people tremble in fear. He has advanced from the peak evolution stage to the mid-level perfect stage. Is this possible? Was this possible? Lu Feng's eyes slowly opened. At this moment, he was better than ever. His condition had improved like never before. Mu Xuyan's matter had finally allowed him to let go of himself. He, Lu Feng, did not need any major family clan to help him consolidate his position through marriage. He did not need any powerful assistance to improve himself. He was Lu Feng. He was arrogant, ignorant, childish, and crazy. However, he was the one and only Lu Feng. After losing everything, was he still that stubborn Lu Feng? Once the shackles on his soul were removed, Lu Feng would no longer have any restrictions on his soul. At this moment, the last shackles were shattered. Lu Feng no longer feared or paid attention to anything. He was finally going to completely let go of himself. I am the most honorable emperor of all time and space. In the Massacre Abyss, I once said that one of my goals in this life was to surpass my ancestor, the human monarch. His voice was low, causing everyone to enter Lu Feng's realm following Lu Feng's words. This was the terror of someone who had entered the Tao. When Lu Feng no longer had any shackles, he finally began to unearth and release the special power of power that only the ancient overlords could enter the Tao realm. However, no one acknowledged my existence. Everyone thought that I was a joke. At that time I was mocked by everyone. Even if I wanted to become an emperor, I would still be seen as arrogant and ignorant. However, I did it. 5 emperors, 5 supreme techniques. I resisted and suppressed them head-on. Finally, in submission and trembling, I reached the pinnacle of that realm. I, Lu Feng, was publicly recognized as an emperor. Power ruled the heavens. At this moment, many existences seemed to have seen the birth of a miracle. They saw Lu Feng, the pinnacle battle of a titled emperor. Now, I am no longer a high-ranking warrior. However, I have become even more powerful. This time, I still want to say that I, Lu Feng, will definitely be invincible in this era. I will definitely surpass everything. The moment his voice landed, the phantom behind Lu Feng shattered, and an even more terrifying transformation appeared. It was still an illusory figure. That was a fusion of billions of great demons. That was endless nobility. That was an emperor that made all living beings submit. That was a great emperor. Beneath the phantom, billions of living beings bowed. Countless immortals and demons stared. The river of fate circled around, embellishing the eternal space-time. Power, at this moment, crazily increased again. A hazy transformation began to appear on this supreme great emperor's body. The great emperor's battle robe descended. A supreme crown flickered. Immortals, demons, and sacred beasts prostrated. A flourishing pure land bloomed. This was an emperor, a complete emperor. A great emperor that could suppress all the ancient sages and all the overlords. The face gradually became clear. That face was incomparably familiar to everyone. That was Lu Feng. This unparalleled great emperor that reigned supreme in the galaxy was Lu Feng. If Dao Songtian was here, he would definitely feel a sense of familiarity. This great emperor clone was incomparably similar to the great vision he had seen in the past. However, Lu Feng's great emperor clone was far from being comparable to that vision in terms of power. The shackles of power. Finally, they were shattered again. The strange and powerful force in the divine planes had been strengthened, allowing Lu Feng to enter the most comprehensive state. After shattering the shackles of his soul, Lu Feng seemed to have entered a strange realm. This great emperor clone was the best proof. Advanced, perfect stage, looking at the figure in the sky that had become the source of everything and the center of everything, everyone had a perplexed look on their faces. From the moment the great emperor's vision was born, Lu Feng's eyes had closed again. He seemed to have entered a strange realm. He stood there quietly, but it affected everyone, making them feel an impulse to submit to him. After feeling the great emperor's vision and the power that Lu Feng emitted, many existences murmured in astonishment. He was only one step away from crossing two huge levels. He was only one step away from that final step. Legend has it that the Divine King's forbidden domain, which is also the mythical domain of the Divine King, can only be set foot on a martialist's path that has exceeded the limits of the domain of amplification by 11 times. However, there are also exceptions. There is a special type of domain that, although it has not broken the shackles of the forbidden domain, can possess the power of the forbidden domain. The Overlord of the three realms, the unparalleled Great Emperor. It has once proved the existence of this domain. A figure slowly emerged from the void. No one had noticed when he had arrived, but he had suddenly appeared in front of everyone in an incomparably natural manner. There was not the slightest bit of aura around him. However, his existence seemed to be the center of the universe, with countless nether extermination laws revolving around him. An aura that was incompatible with the universe always existed. Seeing this scene, many guests sucked in a breath of cold air. Although they did not know the identity of the person who had come, they knew the strength of the person who had come. Virtual King. This incomparably young existence was actually a King realm expert. When Mu Bing saw this existence, he knelt on the ground without the slightest hesitation. He had a pious expression on his face. Among the disciples of the Mu clan present, Mu Huang was the only one who did the same. At this moment, he also withdrew all of his aura and knelt on the ground. Old ancestor, at this moment, everyone finally knew the identity of this mighty King realm existence. He was the Mu family's old ancestor, a terrifying virtual king who had lived in seclusion for countless eras. Chapter 285. The virtual king of the Mu clan smiled faintly and slowly raised his arm. With a wave of his hand, he gently lifted the two of them up. Under this gentle wave of his hand, the god-level soldiers could not control their bodies at all and instantly stood up. In the eyes of the gods, all warriors and even martialists were nothing more than ants. Similarly, in the eyes of the King realm existences, the gods below the King realm were also nothing more than ants. Without looking at the two of them, the virtual king of the Mu clan focused his attention on Lu Feng once again. His attention was focused on the peerless Great Emperor avatar behind Lu Feng. This peculiar domain can make a spellcaster unparalleled in strength. After all, this is comparable to the power of the Divine King's forbidden mythological domain. It can be said that as long as one enters this domain, it is equivalent to entering the Divine King's forbidden domain. And this domain represents someone who can fight against the Divine King. Below the Divine King, there is no one who can match him. Everyone was silent. They naturally knew about the Divine King's forbidden domain. It was exclusive to the Divine King and also the reason why the Divine King could be invincible for an era. If an existence at the level of the Divine King had not entered the forbidden domain, then a few heaven-defying quasi-kings might have had a chance of killing him. However, once the Divine King entered the forbidden domain, then even 100 or 10,000 quasi-kings would not be a match for the Divine King. The Divine King was the supreme being of the universe. The Divine King was the Supreme Being. The reason this domain is unknown is not because its enhancement is too weak. After all, it and the Divine King's forbidden domain belong to the same level of existence. The biggest reason why no one knows about it is because its existence is too rare. Since ancient times, only the three supreme overlords and the supreme human king have entered this domain. Therefore, it exists, but it is almost impossible to reach. If one wanted to enter this realm, the requirements were very simple. It wasn't like the Divine King's taboo mythological domain, which required one to walk a path to the extreme and completely comprehend it. However, it was also the most difficult to achieve. Because its only request is crossing two huge levels, fear, stupefaction, everyone was in an endless silence. It was 2 levels higher than his own level. This was almost impossible. Those who could surpass a minor level were considered geniuses. Those who were able to surpass 2 levels were considered peak geniuses. As for those who were able to surpass 3 levels, they were already considered monstrous existences. He was able to surpass a major level. This was almost the strength of an emperor. Those who can surpass 5 minor levels are almost all supreme geniuses. They are extreme geniuses. Above that, there's the Wang Lu family's extreme Dao evildoer, Lu Tao, and the extreme Dao evildoer, heavenly god Jialan, from 600 years ago. They have crossed 6 minor levels, and they belong to the peak of the extreme Dao evildoers. And such an extreme monstrous genius already had a great possibility of breaking through to become a divine king. As for those who can surpass 7 minor levels, then they are destined. They are destined to be kings. They are destined to become the divine king. Destined to be kings. What a terrifying way to put it! In the past 600 years, the human race had given birth to trillions of people. However, among these trillions of people, there were only 2 who had the potential to become the divine king. Now Lu Feng was born. He didn't have the potential to become the divine king. He was destined to be kings. Horrifying, completely horrifying, and boundless shock. Looking at Lu Feng, who was still in a hazy state, the Mu family's virtual king's eyes shone with a peerless radiance. It was a kind of excitement, a kind of trembling expression. His martial Dao incarnations have not completely reached the level where they can fight together. His bloodline still has a 2nd, 3rd, or even 4th awakening. Once he reached the pinnacle of the realm. In that case, he might be able to become the 5th existence to enter the forbidden domain in this era. Everyone looked at Lu Feng. At this moment, there was no other expression on their faces. They were filled with a kind of worship and a kind of trembling. The Mu family's virtual king was right. If all of this reached the peak, then Lu Feng might really have a chance to break into that domain. At that time, he would really be unbeatable. Below the divine king, he would be invincible. Once he entered that domain, only the existence of the divine king would be able to kill him. Even the real body would need to descend and also enter the divine king's forbidden mythological domain. Only when Lu Feng's strength was exhausted and he couldn't maintain that domain state would there be a possibility of killing him. Doesn't this mean that once he enters that domain, he will be unbeatable in this era? Mu Bing's expression trembled as he muttered. Hearing this, the Mu family's virtual king nodded with a grave expression. Once he enters that domain, he will have the battle strength of a foreign path supreme. Compared to a foreign path supreme, he has an even greater characteristic, which is that he can use all of the divine king's divine abilities. It can be said that he is a temporary divine king supreme. And if a divine king wants to escape, there is no divine king who can stop him. Unless the 3 divine kings take action together and seal time and space so that he has no way to escape. Time seemed to freeze at this moment. When the last shackles of his soul were shattered, Lu Feng felt that he had begun to change slightly. He felt that he was getting closer to the domain of a peak perfect stage martial artist. However, the closer he got to this point, the more Lu Feng understood the horror of such battle strength. Previously, he had briefly thought that he was using the ultimate power of the great demon immortal, and that after using the supreme, he could enter the true peak perfect stage martial artist. But at this moment Lu Feng understood. That was simply impossible. Even though he had poured everything he had into the most powerful attack of his life, he still couldn't make it. He could only get close, but he couldn't reach it at all. However, Lu Feng didn't care anymore, because he knew that he still had a martial path avatar that he hadn't condensed. Others needed to reach the upheaval stage to condense their martial path avatar to the 5th stage. But he was different. His martial path avatar, Tongtian Futu, compared to the King avatar, although the grade was inferior, it was superior in quality. Once he completely condensed his innate 3rd stage martial path avatar, he could even summon a 6th stage martial path avatar in the evolution stage. At that time, he might really be able to break the shackles and enter the realm of a peak perfect stage martial artist in the evolution stage. His arm slowly moved. There was an inexplicable smile at the corner of his mouth. It was a strange smile. It seemed to have merged with the truth of heaven and earth, making people feel an indescribable harmony. His eyes, in the end, slowly opened. At this moment, Lu Feng was quietly standing on the peak of the sky, overlooking all the people present. It didn't matter if the other party was a martial artist or a god, or if they were a family head or a young family head. In Lu Feng's eyes they were all the same. There was no difference between them. Slowly sweeping his gaze, reflecting the phantom of the great emperor, Lu Feng at this moment was truly noble, a true emperor. Finally, Lu Feng's gaze fell on the Mu family's virtual king in the sky. There was a strange look in his eyes. It wasn't fear, it was a kind of level gaze, a kind of gaze that was completely equal. You are. The Mu family's virtual king smiled slightly and said slowly, Muqing King. Mushuan King's 3rd son. There was a look of understanding in his eyes. Mushuan King is the ancestor of the Mu family, right? Legend has it that he is a top existence even among the virtual kings. You are his 3rd son. Then you should be very powerful, right? The Mu family's virtual king's smile remained. He nodded his head lightly. Yes, I can be considered powerful. At least, I am stronger than most of the virtual kings. Lu Feng nodded. Right now, I'm not your opponent. But in the near future, I'll come here and fight you. The Mu family's virtual king, Muqing King, was slightly taken aback, but soon showed a smile again. Good, very good. Then I will wait for you here. I hope you won't make me wait. As his voice fell, his figure gradually became hazy and finally disappeared completely. The conversation between the two was simple and calm, but also incomparably strange and incomprehensible. Almost everyone present had no hope of reaching the pinnacle in their lifetime. They had no possibility of touching the king realm in their lifetime. Therefore, they wouldn't understand the meaning of Lu Feng and Muqing King's words. Muqing King disappeared. The only existence that could separate the glory of Lu Feng's power at this moment was gone. Therefore, Lu Feng was the only focus of the world at this moment. Even the gods couldn't share the slightest bit of his glory and glory. Finally, Lu Feng's gaze became firm again. However, this time around, it was Mu Huang who was the target. The battle can begin. I will wait for you here. The battle can begin. Previously, in the eyes of everyone, this was a completely unequal battle. After all, Mu Huang was an existence that had already reached the intermediate stage, upheaval transformation stage. On the other hand, Lu Feng was only at the peak evolution stage. Moreover, compared to Lu Fenglai, Mu Huang was already able to manifest his martial incarnation and fight together with him. At this moment, looking at the incomparably terrifying great desolate world beneath his feet, one could understand how terrifying his battle prowess was. Therefore, in the eyes of many people, the battle between Lu Feng and Mu Huang was completely unequal. However, when the two of them increased their strength to the limit, the crowd once again felt that this battle was completely unequal. However, this time it was because Lu Feng was too strong, too strong. Standing in the boundless great desolate world, Mu Huang's aura began to recover to its peak. In the past, he had never imagined that he would experience such a moment. In the past, it had always been him who confronted those experts that were stronger than him. In the past, it had always been him who enjoyed the reverence of millions and millions of gazes. In the past, it had always been him who was invincible and crushed all obstacles. However, this time, everything had disappeared. He had actually become a foil. Lu Feng, foil, then let him be a foil. However, as a foil, he must also have the glory of a foil. Who said that a supporting role could only be a supporting role? Who said that he could only have the fate of being destroyed? He was unwilling to accept this. He couldn't. Profound Ash, martial technique. He used a martial technique right from the start. At this moment, Mu Huang no longer held anything back. He knew that if he wanted to release his own glory, he must use his strongest strength. Therefore, he had to go crazy in the end. Chapter 286. Within the void, a gloomy world was born. It was as if heaven and earth had fallen and time had lost its color. The world of De Huang had already moved. Within the profound ash, it was as if it had devoured billions of stars. However, facing this attack, Lu Feng merely raised his arm and punched out. Profound ash shattering. Oblivion. The kingdom of death had descended. This was a power that could obliterate everything. However, at the same time, Lu Feng merely raised his hand and gently waved it, shattering. Abyss. Deathly stillness. Emptiness. Shatter, shatter, shatter. All of his moves, all of his martial skills, all of his powers, no matter what they were completely shattered into pieces. Mu Huang's figure was constantly sent flying and falling down. The flickering power on his body became dimmer and dimmer. The phenomenon of De Huang was on the verge of shattering. Sorrow. It was as if a sorrowful prelude had been born between heaven and earth. However, everyone understood that no matter how crazy Mu Huang was, he would not succeed. A miracle would not happen. Because the person he was fighting against was a miracle. His strongest ability was to strangle miracles. No matter how powerful Mu Huang was, no matter how powerful he was, no matter how terrifying his attacks were, in front of Lu Feng, he did not have the slightest strength to resist. Before the shackles on Lu Feng's heart had been shattered, Mu Huang had already been no match for him. Now that Lu Feng had entered this strange realm and condensed his great emperor phenomenon, he had become even more terrifying. Mu Huang no longer had the slightest ability to resist. Looking at Mu Huang, who was still going crazy, Lu Feng's mouth hung a trace of an indescribable smile. He gently stretched out his arm. Just like that, he condensed a powerful attack and waved it at Mu Huang. At this moment, it was as if time and space were shattered. Lu Feng's strength had already reached a level that Mu Huang could not imagine. His combat strength was incomprehensible, and it was this final punch that completely shattered Mu Huang's everything. The phenomenon of De Huang was shattered into pieces and finally disappeared. The illusory figure supported by the bloodline directly faded and was finally annihilated. Everything that Mu Huang had been so proud of, had been reduced to nothingness by Lu Feng's punch. Xiao Chen stood quietly in the sky. The terrifying and oppressive mysterious phenomenon behind him had all been withdrawn. At this moment, other than the fact that Lu Feng was still floating in the air, no one could sense any fluctuations from him. However, many of the existences present were in awe of Lu Feng. They understood that this young man's rise was unstoppable. With his shocking talent and insane battle prowess, coupled with the nurturing and protection of the number one family in the world, as long as he didn't fall into any desperate situation, he would definitely be able to reach the realm of great success. Moreover, King Muqing's words earlier had allowed everyone to understand this young man's potential. He was destined to become an emperor. He was destined to become a supreme being of the universe. Furthermore, he might really be able to shatter that taboo domain and possess the taboo power for a short period of time in his most extreme state. If such a day really came, then this young man would definitely be invincible to everyone below the Divine King. He would definitely be able to reach the level where the Divine King couldn't be killed. Xiao Chen scanned the crowd. This ordinary body gave birth to a kind of nobility that made people fluster. Finally, after scanning the crowd, Lu Feng slowly landed on the ground. This time, Lu Feng was extremely satisfied. Although he didn't care about his first appearance, who wouldn't like it if it was perfect? He walked quietly on the stage and walked toward Mu Shuyan. At this moment, everyone cast envious gazes toward Mu Shuyan. They understood that this girl was probably going to soar into the sky this time. She was going to be extremely noble. In ancient times and among the different races, this girl was very likely to be a crown prince's concubine. Mu Shuyan stood up and looked at Lu Feng. Her eyes were filled with a gentleness that had never been seen before. She had experienced too many ups and downs that day. Her father had betrayed her for the sake of her family and plunged her into the abyss of despair. Lu Feng's first acceptance had brought her back to heaven from the abyss. She didn't care about Lu Feng's status or Lu Feng's strength. She only wanted Lu Feng to stand in front of her and hold up the sky of hope for her. Gazing at Lu Feng, a dazzling smile appeared in Mu Shuyan's eyes. She was incomparably happy. She slowly stretched out her hands. Everything was so tranquil. The most beautiful scenery seemed to have appeared at this moment. On this day, time and space shook. Countless ancient existences in the entire human federation were awakened. Shocking power broke through everything and started to blossom in the entire universe. Countless unparalleled existences woke up on the capital administrative planet, the human king planet, the Federation planet, the heavenly planet, and other super life-bearing planets in the human race's territory. This was the first time they had appeared in front of so many living beings. Among them, the Federal University of the Capital Administrative Planet, the Human King Planet, and the Federal World had all walked out of the three great human Holy Lands. This had allowed many alien races to see the true strength of the human race. On the Human King Planet, the Lu family had awakened more than 1,000 godly beings. Among them, the number of godly beings that had entered the King realm was even more terrifying. They had reached an extreme standard. Among them, many beings could even sense the aura of two life and death sovereigns. All the alien race powerhouses understood that the one with the aura of life and death was the quasi-life and death sovereigns. The quasi-life and death sovereigns of the Lu family meant that no one below the Divine King was a match for them. They even dared to oppose the Divine King. This was because they were supremes of the alien path. In addition to the two supremes of the alien path that had appeared in the Lu family, the Federal University, which had been silent for 4,000 years, had also produced a celestial emperor. Everyone knew that a celestial emperor was definitely above the average supremes of the alien path. They had the strength to defeat the Divine King. As for the Federation world, an ancient virtual king from 5,000 years ago had also appeared on the planet where the powerhouses of the Federation gathered. After being silent for 5,000 years, although he had yet to shatter the final domain and enter the final realm, he had used another method to become a supremacy of the alien path. In addition to the 4 divine king supremes of the alien path, the large number of King Realm and Void Dharch powerhouses had allowed the alien race to truly witness the terror of the human race. After all, in the entire universe, only the Emperor race, which had 2 kings, could contend with the 4 divine king supremes of the alien path. Of course, some King Realm powerhouses of the alien race had even discovered that the aura of the peerless Divine King had once descended on the Federation world at the location where the incident had occurred. Moreover, it had been a peerless Divine King who had appeared after the incident. From the remnant aura of that existence, some ancient King Realm powerhouses had come to a shocking conclusion. That was, the Divine King Supremes of the human race might still exist. No one below the King Realm knew about this discovery. However, to those virtual King Supremes and Void Thearchs who were similar to Psyche Masters, this was too terrifying. After all, the four Supremes of the alien path and the Divine King Supremes of the human race were enough to wipe out any other race apart from the Emperor race and the two other peak Overlords who had given birth to Overlords of the previous epoch. Many ancient alien race powerhouses were awakened by the shocking aura of the human race and woke up from their daze. They did not know what had happened. As time passed, the various major races finally understood what had happened. And they also finally understood why the human race had gone crazy. It was rumored that the most powerful demon of the human race, Lu Feng, had appeared publicly for the first time and announced his arrival to the human race. However, he had been captured by an unknown Supremes and disappeared completely. Many videos of that day had also begun to spread. Those who had seen the videos were certain that the one who had taken action was definitely the Divine King Supremes and not some alien path Supremes. Mu Xuyan lay quietly on the bed as tears rolled down her cheeks. She was already speechless. Although 3 whole days had passed, the scene from 3 days ago still appeared before her eyes and in her mind. She could not forget it at all. 3 days ago, when she felt that the happiest moment had arrived, everything changed. At the last moment, an arm appeared in the void. It was an arm that was condensed from endless mysterious laws. Power could no longer be described with words. The moment it appeared, all living beings in the Sky Clouds galaxy were completely suppressed. No one could move. Even the Mu family's patriarch, King Muqing, could not approach it. He wanted to help Lu Feng and attack the arm, but he was severely injured by the backlash of the laws and almost died. The arm didn't kill anyone, but when it got close to Lu Feng, it transformed into a strange power. The moment this power bound Lu Feng disappeared completely. At that moment, she felt as if the end of the world had come. Everything had collapsed completely. After her father had chosen to sacrifice her for the family's benefit, Mu Xuyan knew that the only person she could rely on and truly trust was Lu Feng. Lu Feng was her last and only sky. However, the sky in front of her collapsed with a loud bang. She shouted frantically. She wanted to redeem herself. However, in front of that giant hand she was just an ant. She could not even put up the slightest resistance. The patriarch of her family came out. He was an existence of the King Realm. However, the King Realm patriarch could not even stop it. He was severely injured in an instant and almost died. This scene made Mu Xuyan feel even more despair. Finally, in that despair, everything came to an end. If it had not been for the appearance of Lu Feng's parents at the last moment, if they had not told her that Lu Feng was still alive, she would have really disappeared. She would have let her soul completely disappear with Lu Feng. Looking out of the window, Mu Xuyan was still crying. However, at this moment, a beautiful smile bloomed on her face. She murmured, "Lu Feng, the next time we meet, I won't be a burden to you. I'll protect you quietly like how you protect me." In the Supreme Council Hall of the Federation world, hundreds of figures were sitting quietly in their seat. This was no longer a place where one could enter just because they had authority. In order to enter this place, one had to at least have the status and strength of an overlord. At this moment, these existences were all silent. They did not say anything. It was not that they did not want to say anything, but that they simply did not have the right to speak. They were only participating, but they had no right to speak. The gazes of these people were all focused on the final seats, on the three silent people. Their gazes were filled with reverence and awe. These three people were from the human King Lu family, the Federation government, and the Federal University. The strength of the three of them were all at the level of the Foreign Path Supremes. They represented the human race of the Federation. They were the pinnacle of combat power in the entire universe. At this moment, they were gathered here only because of the matter regarding Lu Feng. I want to know why the existence of the Divine King's supremacy was not discovered in our human race. Our human race has 15 remnant consciousnesses of the Divine King's supremacy. Although they did not escape the terrifying curse, they left behind precious treasures for the human race. By relying on this power, even an overlord of an era would be obstructed by the remnant consciousnesses if he wanted to kill his way into the human race. Furthermore, even if he managed to break through those defenses, how could he not be discovered? The 15 remnant consciousnesses of the Divine King's supremacy are guarding the first Divine King, an overlord of an era, and our primogenitor human king, a supreme existence comparable to the immortal devil era. In the current era, even the emperor clans cannot compare to our human race. So why did something like this happen this time? Who can give me an explanation? The Lu family supremacy had never spoken in this kind of meeting. However, this time, he could no longer endure it. Because of this incident, the greatest hope of the Lu clan for the past 4,000 years had been destroyed. Everyone fell silent when they heard the Lu family supremacy's words. They were unable to answer because they had no way of answering. Chapter 287. After a long time, the Supreme Being of the Federation government sighed slowly. Time and space were chaotic, and the world was changing. He seemed to be thinking about something. After a long time, he finally said, "I used a supreme technique to trace everything. However, I couldn't get any information about that Divine King. Even when I used the diagram of the heavenly Tao that several Divine Kings had been refining, I couldn't find out his identity. However, it's not like I didn't get anything. Relying on the diagram of the heavenly Tao's faint awakening, I received a revelation. This Divine King seems to be closely related to the human race. However, I don't know which Divine King he is related to." At this moment, many existences were slightly shocked. Even the Supreme Being of the Lu family didn't say anything. They couldn't find anything even with the diagram of the heavenly Tao. This already proved that things were out of their control. Since ancient times, there were not many people who could deceive the diagram of the heavenly Tao. Of course, other than absolute strength, there was another possibility, and that was that the existence deduced by the diagram of the heavenly Tao was closely related to the few divine kings of the human race who condensed the diagram of the heavenly Tao. It was because of this that the diagram of the heavenly Tao couldn't thoroughly investigate. The long silence was broken once again. This time, it was the celestial arch of the Federal University. "There's no need to talk about this now. The most important thing now is to find Lu Feng. He's the key to the future revival of the human race. We can't lose him." Previously, many existences were in a deep sleep. They didn't know about Lu Feng at all. Among them, there were many things that even Lu Tao didn't know about. However, just because they didn't know before didn't mean they didn't know now. Before they entered this conference room, they already knew everything about Lu Feng. Intermediate warrior, blood warrior, final victory. Entering the Tao at a young age with shocking talent, comparable to ancient virtuous paragons. In the abyss of slaughter, the starry river trembled. With the strength of a single person, he was able to contend against 5 great slaughter emperors. Moreover, many existences understood that at that time, Lu Feng had not been at his peak. If he had used his final trump card at that time, he might have had the strength to suppress the 5 emperors. He only appeared 5 days after entering the true massacre abyss. His potential ranked in the top 5 of this epoch. 3 months later, he had completed a shocking transformation. In less than 90 days, he had become a peak evolution stage martial artist. Moreover, he had increased his comprehension to the limit. He had leaped close to 2 major levels and 7 minor levels, directly reaching the high-level perfect stage martial artist. Later on, during the gathering of the Mu family, he even displayed the abnormal sign of a great sovereign. He possessed a terrifying will that could dominate the entire galaxy. Such a monstrous genius was already indescribable. Many extreme experts knew that if Lu Feng was given more time, he definitely had the potential to become the overlord of this era. At that time, he would truly enter the realm of great success, and even the Divine King would not be able to kill him. Unfortunately, before he reached the realm of great success, he had encountered such a calamity. Looking at the slightly gloomy expression of the Lu family's celestial Dharch, the Federal University's celestial Dharch smiled slowly. It seemed to have affected the entire Supreme Council. Celestial Dharch, after Lu Feng's disappearance failed to be investigated, the Radiant Dharch and I have been using the map of the Heavenly Way to investigate Lu Feng's existence. During this period, he seemed to have experienced some shocking danger. His fate was once gloomy, as if he had died. However, in the following period of time, there seemed to be some shocking change. It was this change that caused his fate to change completely. The degree of prosperity surpassed everything. Even the map of the Heavenly Way could not detect him at all. Hearing this, the Lu family's celestial Thearcha's expression changed slightly. A trembling radiance appeared in his eyes, which could even annihilate black holes. He naturally understood the meaning of the Federal University's celestial Thearcha's words. Lu Feng was unharmed. Furthermore, he seemed to have obtained some shocking benefits that caused his fate to change. He had become an existence that even the map of the Heavenly Way could not detect. In that case, are you able to detect his location? This was what the Lu family's celestial Dharch was most concerned about. Upon hearing the celestial Thearcha's words, a rare look of awkwardness appeared on the face of the Federal University's celestial Dharch. Lu Feng of the Lu family seems to be protected by some mysterious power. His fate is incomparably noble. Even the map of the Heavenly Way does not have the right to detect it. If he had not used the Divine King's legacy, and if his current strength had not been too weak, we would not have been able to detect it. At the very least, we would not have been able to detect it. When his fate changed, the map of the Heavenly Way completely lost its effect. However, the final indication that the map of the Heavenly Way gave us was that Lu Feng would return. The day he returns will be the day that the entire universe trembles for him. In an instant, the eyes of many top-notch existences of the Federation shone with astonishment. The map of the Heavenly Way was a supreme sacred object that the human race's Divine King had continuously refined. It was the human race's final trump card. Legend had it that there were as many as 10 powerhouses of the Divine King who had participated in refining it. Among them, there were also invincible existences like the human monarch. Therefore, the map of the Heavenly Way's indication was the truth. In that case, let's wait. We have already waited for 500 years. A few more years won't make a difference. No matter what, we have to protect Lu Feng with all our might. He is the key to the human race's domination of the galaxy in this era. He is the greatest existence of the human race. The map of the Heavenly Way has revealed that the development of this era is too intense. It has already surpassed any era other than the immortal demon era. Due to this intense development, I'm afraid that there will be an earth-shattering disaster in the near future. It seems that this disaster will stain the galaxy with blood and destroy the universe. Therefore, we must have an ultimate existence to suppress everything. Lu Feng is where our hope lies. Many existences fell silent. Regarding the existence of this disaster, there were rumors among the various peak overlords. It seemed that this disaster was related to the curse of the Divine King that would not end well. Therefore, all the major races were slowly accumulating. After all, this disaster was a kind of destruction, but it was also a kind of opportunity. That's right. That mysterious divine king that appeared in our human race, what is his identity? Why don't we have any information about him? You have to know that this is the human race, the space-time controlled by us Supremes. Why can't we sense his existence at all? The Radiant King was puzzled. He spoke out everything that was in his heart. As for this new human godly king that had appeared, they had also done the same. However, the results were not too ideal. After all, the divine king could already deceive the heavens. If they wanted to use the map of the heavenly way to divine the existence of the divine king, only existences of the same realm could do it. Although they were other path supremes, they were not the real divine king. That is an extremely mysterious divine king. However, we can be sure that he is the supremes of our human race. Moreover, this divine king seems to have a deep connection with Lu Feng. Moreover, this divine king has no ill intentions towards the human race. Therefore, we can rest assured. The other races were paying attention to this supreme god king that had suddenly appeared. However, the human race didn't care that much about him. After all, in this era, the divine king was not much different from the other path supremes. After all, that terrifying curse had always existed. The biggest difference between the divine king and the other path supremes was the difference in lifespan. However, with the existence of the terrifying curse, there was not much of a difference between the two. After all, the other path supremes were defined to be comparable to the divine king in terms of combat strength. Alright. It's useless to think too much now. It's time for the human race to make a move. After 500 years of silence, many races have already forgotten how terrifying the human race is. Let's take this opportunity to let those who covet the human race know how powerful the human race is. The Celestial King spoke. Although he was the other path supremes of the Lu family, his right to speak was unparalleled in the Federation. Moreover, this time, 2 other path supremes had appeared in the Lu family at the same time. This made the restless clans in the Federation, who wanted to replace the human king and the Lu family, cease all their banners and drums. Looking at the Celestial King, the Radiant King nodded slightly and said slowly, "Seconded." The Celestial Emperor of the Federal University also said, "Seconded." Then, many existences began to speak. Seconded, seconded. Lu Feng could feel the endless pulling around him. He couldn't do anything. He could only watch helplessly as he was dragged into the endless void. He could only watch as the world around him disappeared. He could only watch as he was sucked into that place. His eyes were filled with an incomparably strange expression. Lu Feng knew that he hadn't gone too far. He had actually returned to this place. He had returned to Planet Koan. That's right. Under that terrifying power, Lu Feng didn't have the slightest ability to change his hands. The only thing he could do was use his special ability to sense everything outside. When he was dragged to the end by this invincible power, Lu Feng finally understood where he was. He really hadn't expected that this invincible existence was actually hiding in Planet Koan. In an instant, Lu Feng seemed to have thought of something. Slowly, the boundless power in the surroundings disappeared. At this moment, Lu Feng was in an ancient palace hall. This palace hall was incomparably mottled and disorderly, as if it had experienced the baptism of countless years. It had a desolate aura of a distant era. The entire palace hall was incomparably tall and huge. It even gave people the feeling of a world. There were countless crisscrossing marks on the surrounding broken walls, adding a tragic aura to this desolate palace hall. He stood there quietly. There was no one in sight. It was boundless silence. After waiting for an unknown amount of time, a voice suddenly rang out in the palace hall. "Child, you have finally come." When he heard this voice, Lu Feng's body trembled slightly. There was a look of horror in his eyes. The reason for that was because there was something special about the voice. It was the strongest will of the heavens and earth, as if it wanted to reign supreme. Although it was just a voice, it seemed that this invincible will had already penetrated deep into every corner. Even the voice carried such a feeling. At this moment, countless tumultuous waves appeared in Lu Feng's heart, setting off a perilous situation. Lu Feng himself understood that his nobility came from the depths of his fate. It was an innate nobility that even fate was forced to acknowledge. Even a divine spirit expert couldn't damage his nobility in the slightest. Even a true god existence couldn't make him acknowledge it. However, a mere voice was enough to make him feel an urge to submit, and a feeling of fear arose within him. This kind of existence, since ancient times, only existed in that realm. Only the truly supreme existences in the Milky Way of the universe could possess them. He was the divine king. In the depths of planet Kuan, there was actually a divine king hidden. Chapter 288. Lu Feng took a deep breath. He could sense that the owner of this figure didn't seem to have much malice towards him. However, even if there was any malice, he was afraid that he couldn't go against it. After all, this was the divine king. After a moment of silence, Lu Feng slowly asked, "Are you the legendary divine king who was defeated by the human race here?" When Lu Feng was investigating the history of Kunming, he had seen the most famous incident. It was rumored that before Kunming was discovered, the divine king of the human race, the divine king of chaos, had engaged in an unusual confrontation with the peerless divine king of the other race on planet Kuan. In the end, the divine king of chaos won. However, the divine king of the other race was nowhere to be found. It seemed that he had been killed by the divine king of chaos. It should be known that the divine king of chaos was difficult to kill, but this wasn't absolute. If the difference in strength between the two sides was too great, it could still be easily killed. For example, the existence of the third-level divine king of the mythological taboo region, which was also the terrifying supreme existence of the overlords of the epoch. If they wanted to kill a divine king, they didn't need to use much power at all. The divine king of chaos was one of the top divine kings of the human race. He was in the second-level divine king of the mythological taboo region and had the martial path incarnation of the chain of chaos. Although it would be difficult for him to kill an ordinary divine king, it wasn't impossible. However, this statement was never accepted by the public. In many people's hearts, this was just a false news deliberately released by Planet Kuan to increase his fame and attract countless tourists. After all, a battle between two great gods was enough to shatter a Grade 1 planet with life. If it was a battle between the divine king of chaos and the divine king of the other race, it would be extremely easy for them to shatter the entire Sky Clouds galaxy. Now that he was here, Lu Feng finally understood that this legend was true. The only difference was that the divine king of chaos didn't kill the divine king of the other race. Instead, he seemed to have sealed him here. Upon hearing Lu Feng's voice, the figure didn't speak. Instead, he released an aura. But this aura gave people an incomparably familiar misconception. It seemed to originate from the same soul transmission. At this moment, a frozen expression appeared on Lu Feng's face. After a while, his face finally contorted with shock. Because he felt this. The aura that was released caused Lu Feng to be shocked. He went completely crazy. Only one person could have the power of chaos and the existence of the human race's divine king. That person was none other than the divine king of chaos. The one sealed here wasn't the divine king of the other race. This place was actually the divine king of the human race. The divine king of chaos was sealed here. As if he had sensed Lu Feng's endless shock, the hazy voice was heard again. It sounded like a deep sigh and a sense of helplessness. Why is it impossible? That's right. I am Shi Kunming. My title is the Divine King of Chaos. Silence. After a moment of incomparable shock, Lu Feng fell completely silent. He couldn't think of anything else at this moment. His mind was in complete chaos, making it impossible for him to calm down. You don't believe me? Lu Feng remained silent. Because he was only a peak evolution stage martial artist, he really didn't know what the truth was. A deep sigh was heard. This voice had lost the terrifying will of the past. What remained in Lu Feng's heart was a deep sense of helplessness. At this moment, Lu Feng suddenly thought of many things. The Divine King of Chaos was a collection of contradictions. Therefore, the contradictions seemed to have appeared at the end of his life. He had caused chaos in the human race for 700 years. He could be considered as one of the longest Divine King of the human race. In the era when he ruled over the human race, his might was unparalleled. After all, the terror of a double godly king's mythological domain made him one of the strongest godly kings in the entire universe, second only to the overlords of the epoch. During the early period of the Divine King of Chaos, the human race had indeed expanded crazily. They continued the legacy of the Divine King and the human king. In the current era, no one could compare to them. Even the few ancient peak races could only retreat when they encountered the human race because of their race's supreme Divine King. However, it was this incomparably glorious Divine King who almost brought the human race to a peerless status. However, at the end of his reign, there was an unimaginable change. The Divine King of Chaos no longer paid attention to the development of the human race. His attention seemed to be focused on one thing. He kept running around the entire universe and seemed to be discussing something with some ancient supreme Divine King. It should be known that the former Divine King of Chaos had always suppressed the foreign Divine King. Moreover, among the human race, the Divine King of Chaos had also committed some bloody massacres. The number of existences that were killed by him was horrifying. These existences were even some shocking geniuses. At the end of the Divine King of Chaos, the human race entered an era of withering geniuses. And it was also because of his crazy practices that the human race finally fell from the position of the number one race in the universe. At this moment, Lu Feng seemed to have thought of something. His eyes were still filled with endless shock. However, there was also a hint of relief in his expression. Are you really His Majesty the Divine King of Chaos? In that case, who is the Divine King of the human race that replaced you? Lu Feng thought it through. It seemed like the transformation of the Divine King of Chaos had started after this battle with the Kuan star. In the past, he might not have felt that there was a problem. However, now that he thought about it, Lu Feng seemed to have understood something. For a long time, no sound was heard in the void. It seemed like the passage of time could not be felt in this place. After a long time, the voice of the Divine King of Chaos rang out again. That is the mysterious Divine King of Chaos. His power is very powerful, even more so than mine. However, he has yet to reach the level of an epic overlord. However, he should not be far from that level. This is an ancient ruin discovered by the first Divine King of the human race. Legend has it that this was once the immortal palace of an epic overlord during the immortal demon era. Only this place can withstand the great battle of the Divine King without being destroyed. Back then, after discovering his existence, I lured him here and laid all my cards on the table with him. During our conversation, I learned that he seemed to be planning an earth-shattering scheme. However, this scheme was going to endanger the existence of the human race. Therefore, I made my move. Looking at the mottled traces here, Lu Feng finally understood. It turned out that this place had once experienced a peerless clash between the Divine King and the Divine King. Moreover, these two Divine Kings were invincible existences in the second level of the Divine King mythological forbidden domain. It was no wonder that there were so many broken walls and ruins here. In the end, I failed. However, he was unable to kill me. He could only use the uniqueness of this immortal palace to seal me here. This time, I have been gone for thousands of years. An earth-shattering secret. This was definitely an earth-shattering secret. The peerless divine king of the human race, the divine king of chaos, had been replaced by the divine king of a foreign race. If this had happened in any era or epoch, it would have been enough to shock the entire galaxy. At this moment, Lu Feng was thankful for the terrifying curse for the first time. The curse that the divine king would not have a good ending. If it had not been for this curse, the entire human race would have been in danger if the fake divine king of chaos had continued to rule over the human race. Your Majesty of Chaos, why have you brought me here this time? Lu Feng knew that the divine king of chaos had brought him here and even used such a special method. Most likely, there was something that he needed him for. However, he really did not know what he could do to help the divine king. Upon hearing Lu Feng's words, the divine king of chaos seemed to hesitate for a long time before he said slowly, "Indeed, I need you. However, I did not want to use this method to summon you here. After thousands of years of accumulation, I have finally condensed this tiny bit of power. In order to bring you here, I have exhausted almost all of it. If I fail this time, I am afraid that I will truly disappear completely. Previously, when you came to planet Koan, I used my power to summon you. However, you did not seem to have any intention of coming. After you left, I finally could not wait any longer. Because I no longer had time." At this moment, Lu Feng suddenly understood. No wonder he had felt that kind of call several times when he had set foot on planet Koan. It turned out that this voice had actually come from the sealed divine king of chaos. Back then, he had not known what this call was. He had guessed that this voice might have something to do with the divine king of chaos. Therefore, Lu Feng had chosen to ignore it or wait until he was strong enough to come here. However, he had not expected that he had guessed correctly. This voice was actually the call of the divine king of chaos. Soon, Lu Feng understood. He raised his head and looked at the endless void. Then, he said slowly, "Your Majesty of Chaos, are only those who have entered the Tao able to help you?" This was the only possibility that Lu Feng could think of. After all, he was only an evolutionary stage martialist now. Although he was almost equivalent to a high-level perfect stage martialist when he unleashed his full power, he was still an ant. In front of a god, such strength was nothing more than an ant, let alone an existence like the divine king of chaos. He had exceptional talent and was unparalleled in the world. However, he had yet to reach the realm of great success. With his current strength, many people could easily kill him. Therefore, the only possibility that the divine king of chaos was calling him was that he had entered the Tao. As expected, the divine king of chaos voice sounded again. "Indeed, you can help me because you are a person who has entered the Tao. If that were not the case, I would not have poured so much power into calling you over. In the past few thousand years, there has never been a person who has entered the Tao on planet Earth. Even in the entire Sky Clouds galaxy, there has never been a single person who has entered the Tao. Therefore, even if they are stronger than you, they cannot help me." Lu Feng nodded gently. However, he still felt that something was wrong. However, he could not think too much about it at the moment. At that moment, the divine king of chaos voice sounded again. "Lu Feng, I can sense that you are called Lu Feng. Your primogenitor is my senior, the peerless human king." With regards to the Chaos God King knowing his identity, Lu Feng had no doubts at all. The Divine King of Chaos was the first Divine King to appear after the Human King and Emperor Divine King. Therefore, it was not a problem for him to address the Human King's primogenitor as a senior. Chapter 289. I can see the density of your bloodline and your exceptional talent. Perhaps it won't take long for you to ascend to the level of the Divine King, complete a shocking transformation, and become invincible. However, even if it's just this little bit of time, I can't wait any longer. I can sense that their conspiracy is starting to emerge. The human race is currently in urgent need of a divine king. The human race can't afford to wait any longer. I can't hold on for that long either. Therefore, I need your help. I need you to release me. However, there might be danger during this process. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that you might die. Are you willing to help me? Lu Feng was silent. The Divine King of Chaos didn't say anything either. After a long time, Lu Feng finally lifted his head again. He slowly and deeply nodded his head. Indeed, there was an alarming danger. However, Lu Feng wasn't afraid of anything. Furthermore, the Divine King of Chaos had already said so. The mastermind behind this conspiracy seemed to have already begun to carry out his plan. Although Lu Feng wasn't a sage, he couldn't shrink back in the face of the greater good of the human race. It could be said that the fate of the human race was already in his hands. How could Lu Feng back down? Thus, after taking a deep breath, Lu Feng nodded slowly and solemnly. I am willing. For the human race, he would risk his life. So be it. I, Lu Feng, am not afraid of anything. In the face of the greater good, I am willing to try. An excited voice rang out in the void. Good, good, good. Lu Feng, you are amazing. Don't worry, I will do my best to protect you. After all, you represent the future of the human race. When he heard that excited voice and sensed that terrifying fluctuation, Lu Feng's face turned slightly pale. Although the Divine King of Chaos had been sealed, he was still the peerless Divine King. Just the slightest trace of aura was enough to make his entire body tremble and his blood freeze. However, within the endless pale face and pupils, there was a trace of undetectable light. It was the light of wisdom. Lu Feng, come in. Jingji walked forward. I walked to the center of the Immortal Palace. The sealed me was at the center of the Immortal Palace. All the restrictions along the way have been destroyed by the battle between me and the Divine King, so there is no danger here. Lu Feng nodded gently. He did not hesitate and walked forward. This was the Immortal Palace. It was an immortal palace left behind by an epic overlord of the primordial immortal devil era. It hadn't been damaged even after experiencing countless great calamities of the universe, but it had been beaten to such a state by the collision of the two divine kings. At this moment, Lu Feng was even more horrified by the strength of the Divine King of Chaos. Although the Divine King of Chaos was the loser in the end and was sealed here, being able to fight to such an extent was already enough to shock the galaxy. The Immortal Palace was really too big. Moreover, it seemed to be an inner world. He couldn't feel the existence of any universal laws. In the beginning, Lu Feng was still walking slowly. However, after walking for nearly an hour, he realized that he hadn't walked far at all. Later, Lu Feng began to increase his speed. In the end, he even increased his speed to the peak. How fast was Lu Feng when he unleashed his full power? He didn't know before, but Lu Feng knew now. Once he unleashed his full power, it was under the premise that he didn't use his bloodline power, the power of the great demon's true essence, and the strange power. His speed had already surpassed the speed of many perfect stage martial artists. Although he couldn't reach the level of 1,000 miles in an instant, Lu Feng could fly 2 to 3 kilometers per second. In other words, Lu Feng's speed had reached the level of 10,000 miles per hour. This speed was enough to break free from any gravitational constraints and fly directly into space. At this moment, Lu Feng began to understand why it was said that martial artists could live independently in space. After all, ordinary perfect stage martial artists could rely on their own strength to fly into space and roam freely as long as they wanted to. However, relying on this speed, Lu Feng still spent a full day and night before he finally saw the magnificent building of the Central Palace. 240,000 kilometers. Just the distance I've traveled is 240,000 kilometers. However, this isn't even half of the entire Immortal Palace. This Immortal Palace is really terrifying. Such a huge building world was simply a miracle. This was almost equivalent to a second-grade life planet. A huge immortal palace comparable to a second-grade life planet. This was indeed worthy of being called the Immortal Palace. Standing in front of the incomparably tall pillars, Lu Feng stopped in his tracks. Any one of the pillars in front of him had a diameter of a few thousand meters and a height of more than 100 miles. There were no less than 10,000 such pillars here, which was almost inconceivable. Although the human race had experienced tens of thousands of years of technological development, it was impossible to build such a huge immortal palace. Looking at these miraculous buildings, Lu Feng yearned even more for the existence of the primitive, immortal demon era. He was also very interested in the secret behind the fall of this incomparably brilliant and invincible era. Wait until I become strong enough and step into the massacre abyss. I must see the truth behind the fall of the immortal demon era. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng once again increased his speed and flew towards the center of the palace at full speed. This, Lu Feng mumbled to himself, but no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to say anything, because the scene that appeared before him at this moment was truly too shocking and horrifying. In front of him was a towering throne that towered between heaven and earth, as if it was the only supreme seat in the universe. Just the base of the throne was more than 100 miles in radius. At the peak of this supreme throne, a figure was sitting there quietly. However, this figure did not have that kind of calm and indifferent posture. His body was entangled and pierced by countless chains. Lu Feng recognized these chains. How could he, who had studied all the deeds of the 15 divine kings, not recognize these things? Similar to the Yellow Springs Divine King's Yellow Springs Monument, it was a famous sacred weapon in the history of the human race. It was also a peerless weapon whose fierce reputation had spread far and wide in the history of the foreign races. It was called the Chaos Chain. The Chaos Chain was the martial incarnation of the Divine King of Chaos, the strongest weapon he had condensed. In history, there were many legends about the Chaos Chain. However, there were many doubts about the Chaos Chain among the human race. Among them, the biggest doubt was that the Chaos Chain didn't seem to be that powerful. That's right, the Chaos Chain was completely different from the Yellow Springs Divine King's Yellow Springs Monument, which had astonishing power. Its power was even incomparable to the martial incarnations of many of the first-stage Divine King's mythological taboo domains. Of course, this was referring to those who relied on their martial incarnations to enter the Divine King's domain. The reason why the Chaos Chain was able to kill so many foreign race experts, the virtual King Void Emperor, was not because it was powerful, but because it was in the possession of the Divine King of Chaos. Back then, the Divine King of Yellow Springs relied on the existence of the Yellow Springs Monument to kill millions and millions of races' pinnacle extreme Tao existences. However, the Chaos Chain relied on the possession of the Divine King of Chaos to make a name for itself and become the peerless sacred weapon of the human race. However, this had nothing to do with Lu Feng. That was because Lu Feng knew that even if the Chaos Chain did not possess the legendary peerless power, its degree of terror was still not something that he could imagine. Of course, what shocked Lu Feng the most was that the Chaos Chain was actually being used by that foreign race's Divine King to seal his master, the Divine King of Chaos. His entire body was being chained by the Chaos Chain that was filled with the essence of chaos. However, at this moment, the Divine King of Chaos still revealed a smile after going through endless trials and tribulations. It was a kind of benevolent smile. You saw it. That's right. The thing that sealed me was my martial incarnation. It was also my strongest divine weapon, the Chaos Chain. Lu Feng grew silent. His eyes flickered and a complicated expression appeared on his face. Haha, that foreign race's peerless divine king is indeed extremely powerful. I don't know what kind of secret technique he used to refine my martial incarnation. In the end, he even used it to seal me here. Lu Feng took a deep breath. At this moment, the will that belonged to someone who had entered the Tao was completely activated by him. Lu Feng did not hold back in the slightest. The great realm that belonged to the ancient almighty sages was completely unleashed at this moment. After silently sensing for a moment, a strange expression suddenly appeared on Lu Feng's face. However, before he could say anything, the divine king of chaos voice sounded. Are you wondering why you can't sense the existence of any soul in my body? Lu Feng took a deep breath and a strange expression appeared in his eyes. However, he still nodded firmly and said, Indeed, I wanted to communicate with you. However, I discovered that you actually have no soul. A person who had entered the Tao was not just a realm. It represented a mysterious level and a truly mysterious path. Since ancient times, the number of people who had been able to enter the Tao could be counted on one's fingers. The Divine King was a person who had entered the Tao. There was no doubt about this. Lu Feng also understood that those foreign supremes were also people who had entered the Tao. However, other than those who had the combat strength of a supremacy, even someone as heaven-defying as his father, Lu Tao, who had killed gods, had not entered the Tao. The only people Lu Feng had seen who had entered the Tao were his teacher, Dao Songtian, Tu Tianshan, and the Lu family's ancestor. It was very difficult to find a person who had entered the Tao. They were even rarer than the virtual king. Therefore, it was reasonable for the divine king of chaos to say that he could not find a person who had entered the Tao. At this moment, after hearing the Chaos God King voice out the doubts in his heart, Lu Feng had nothing to hide and nodded his head. At this moment, a wry smile appeared in the eyes of the divine king of chaos. It was a kind of helpless sorrow. He stretched out an arm wrapped in countless chains and gently touched his body. The desolate look in his eyes made Lu Feng tremble. The Chaos Chain is my martial Tao incarnation. It is the power I use to enter the Divine King's domain. It is like a part of my life. However, I did not expect that it would be the Chaos Chain that would seal me completely in the end. The God King of another race used a terrifying secret technique. It's simply unimaginable. The chain of chaos was completely used by him to seal me away. And the chain of chaos is my martial arts incarnation. Thus, this chain of chaos ultimately sealed away my soul as well. After countless changes over time, 1,000 years ago, my soul was finally completely assimilated by the chaos chain. As a result, my soul was annihilated. Lu Feng was stunned. Soul annihilation? Souls could be annihilated? Souls could still exist after being annihilated? Was this possible? Chapter 290. The Divine King of Chaos took a deep breath and slowly stood up from the huge throne. However, at this moment, countless chains surged crazily and suppressed him on the throne once again. Lu Feng could feel the sorrow of the Divine King of Chaos. The Divine King Supreme was a supreme being that even the laws of the universe had to avoid. He was a great symbol that would appear when he descended upon a star field. However, at this moment, he was restrained here by his own martial path avatar. This was a great sorrow. I am the Divine King Supreme. Throughout the ages, except for the three supreme overlords and the human king, there are very few divine kings who can match me. Although my soul has already been assimilated, as if I have completely lost it, I am still a godly king. The power of the Divine King is unimaginable. Even the Divine King Supreme is ultimately not an existence like the Divine King. In terms of combat power, they may be able to match the Divine King Supreme, but they will never possess the true remarkable power of a Supreme. Therefore, even if a part of my soul has been annihilated and another part has been assimilated, I will still not die. Let me out of here. Give me time. Then I will once again cultivate my soul and return to the supreme pinnacle. At this moment a terrifying majesty bloomed. It was a supreme and invincible will that could overlook billions of living beings. Throughout the ages, it was unparalleled. Lu Feng's eyes shone with a dazzling radiance. This was the Divine King. This was a supreme being that surpassed the overlords of the universe. The first level of the Divine King realm was the supreme of the universe. The second level of the Divine King realm was known as the Overlord of Time, which meant that time could not control their lives. The third level of the legendary Divine King realm was the Overlord of the Epoch and had the combat power of the 33 layers of the ultimate sky. The Divine King of Chaos was at the second tier of the Divine King's mythological domain. Therefore, he was the sovereign of time, whose glory could not be stripped away by time. Even though he was imprisoned here, he still possessed the peerless power of the time sovereign. Lu Feng, I don't have much power left. Now, let's begin. Lu Feng could clearly sense that the power of the Divine King of Chaos was rapidly disappearing. He knew that the Divine King of Chaos had used up the last of his strength to revive. He couldn't hold on any longer. Lu Feng lowered his head respectfully. At this moment, he was wrapped up in the will of the Tao. No one could sense the strange fluctuations in Lu Feng's eyes. Your Majesty Chaos, how can I help you? The Divine King of Chaos was silent for a moment before he spoke slowly. It's very simple. Enter this place and use your strength to break these chains. Lu Feng was stunned. This was not an act, but a genuine shock. Break these chains. You should be aware of my cultivation level. How can I break these chains? It's your martial Tao incarnation, the Chain of Chaos. The Chain of Chaos was the martial Tao incarnation of the 11th tier. Its power could no longer be described as peerless. Its power was the pinnacle of the Tao, and no weapon could compare to it. Asking him to break the Chain of Chaos, wasn't this a joke? Looking at Lu Feng's stunned expression, the Divine King of Chaos smiled. He shook his head gently. For thousands of years, although I was completely locked up and sealed by the Chain of Chaos, it used to belong to me, and is my martial Tao incarnation. After all this time, I have already assimilated with it. It doesn't have much power left. Although it has lost its power, the Chain of Chaos is my martial Tao incarnation. At this moment, even the Quasi-King of Life and Death can't break it with brute force. However, just because the Quasi-King of Life and Death can't do it doesn't mean you can't. A bright light flashed in Lu Feng's eyes. Entering the Tao? The Divine King of Chaos nodded gently. Yes, entering the Tao. You have only just stepped into the Tao realm, so you don't understand the terror of entering the Tao. Otherwise, the current you wouldn't only have this level of strength. Since ancient times, only 4 people have been able to enter the Tao at a young age. They were the overlords of the 4 realms and your ancestor, the human king. The reason they were able to reach the peak of their era and even surpass the limits of their era, besides relying on their peerless talent, was because they had entered the Tao. Lu Feng fell silent. Lu Feng had no idea about the benefits of entering the Tao. The only thing he felt was that he had an incomparable advantage in terms of comprehension and communication with nature. Other than that, there was nothing else. Those who have entered the Tao are incomparably miraculous existences, beloved by the origin of the universe. Outside the 6 realms, there was an ancient era that completely belonged to the human Tao. At that time, 8 invincible existences appeared. Their power was so great that even the Divine King had to bow down to them. Even the overlords of their era couldn't harm them. They were invincible not because of how powerful they were. On the contrary, they didn't have the slightest bit of power. Because of this, although they were comparable to the overlords of the epochs, they didn't have any strength. In the end, they weren't able to leave behind any traces of their era after the Great Calamity, allowing them to leave behind a great name. These 8 powerhouses didn't cultivate any power. They were all people who had entered the Tao and walked a long path. Even the overlords of their era couldn't compare to them. Therefore, even though they didn't have any power, their existence was unbelievably strong. They could even use the power of the origin of the universe to suppress all opponents if they wanted to. Lu Feng's face twisted slightly. He had heard of this before. In the beginning, he didn't believe it. However, he had to believe it now that the Divine King of Chaos, the Supreme of Time, had said it. Your Majesty of Chaos, are you talking about the legendary ancestors of the human race, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors? The 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors were the legendary ancestors of the human race. They were the founders and inheritors of the human race's life spark. Their greatness shone through the ages. However, apart from those who were truly at the pinnacle, no one believed that the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors truly existed. The Divine King of Chaos nodded gently. Indeed, these 8 invincible existences are the ancestors of the human race, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. If they hadn't led the human race to its peak in that ancient era, the human race wouldn't have flourished. In the future era, the spark of the human race wouldn't have appeared. And they were able to do this by relying on stepping into the Tao. Those who enter the Tao are favored by heaven and earth, protected by fate and supported by the universe. If one's path reaches a mysterious level, then even if one doesn't have the slightest bit of power, they will still be protected by everything and have great luck. Even the Divine King can't harm them. As for you, although there's still a long way to go before you reach that level, it's already enough for you to enter the Tao. The Divine King of Chaos paused for a moment, as if he could already see the moment when he would escape danger. A radiance that Lu Feng couldn't understand appeared in his eyes. Entering the Tao means that you're invulnerable to all evil and untainted by all laws. The sealing power here isn't enough to affect you at all. Therefore, as long as you enter this place, I can use the last of my power to instantly raise you to a level comparable to the Divine King. At that time, by relying on my power, you can completely shatter this chain of chaos and release me. The Divine King of Chaos was already a little deranged. After being trapped for thousands of years, he had finally waited for this moment. Finally, he could reappear and restore his former invincible glory. Lu Feng nodded deeply. At this moment, the peculiar divine light in his eyes grew even stronger. This was a kind of realization, a kind of shock, a kind of doubt, and a kind of resolute expression. Finally, Lu Feng took a step forward. Every step he took was filled with exceptional determination. It was a kind of craziness that was the most persistent. It was as if the Lu Feng at this moment had forgotten everything for the sake of the human race. All of the aura around him dispersed. It was filled with the intertwining of principles and an indescribable feeling of being close to heaven and earth. This was something that only those who had entered the Tao could possess. Lu Feng knew that his little bit of strength was simply a joke in this place. Only those who had entered the Tao could have some effect in this place. Therefore, he dispersed those meaningless powers and exclusively used the willpower of those who had entered the Tao. After what seemed like tens of millions of years, Lu Feng finally arrived before the ancient throne. Before him was an ancient and decaying formation. Mottled marks crisscrossed on it, as if it was about to shatter. As for Lu Feng, he stopped before the formation and did not advance in the slightest. Seeing this scene, a peculiar expression appeared in the great eyes of the Divine King of Chaos. This is merely a formation used to isolate one's aura. It was casually carved by that foreign race's Divine King. He was afraid that I would use my remaining power to transmit information about my existence, so he sought out the human race's peerless Divine King to release me. However, this formation has been tempered by me for countless years and is about to be scrapped. It is precisely because of this that I am able to transmit my willpower. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. He slowly stood up and revealed a faint smile. However, this smile was an incomparably strange smile. He did not move. At this moment, the Divine King of Chaos seemed to be slightly impatient. However, he still controlled his temper and said, "Lu Feng, I do not have much time left. Hurry up. This is my last chance. I have already recovered all my power. You have to know that if I am unable to provide enough power at the last moment, then both of us might fail. The price of failure is that both of us will eventually disappear completely." Hearing this, Lu Feng still did not move. He still maintained that strange smile on his face. Suddenly, Lu Feng spoke. "As long as power is injected into this formation, it can be completely reactivated and returned to its original state, right?" The Divine King of Chaos was slightly taken aback. He looked at Lu Feng with an odd expression, but he did not say anything. Seeing this, Lu Feng nodded in understanding. "It seems that my power is still unable to return to its former state. However, by relying on the power of a Dao Initiate, it should be able to last for a while." After saying this, Lu Fenglai turned around, as if pondering how to inject power. When he saw this, the Divine King of Chaos's expression turned extremely unsightly. He said in an odd manner, "Lu Feng, what are you trying to do?" Lu Feng smiled faintly. The odd look in his eyes became even more obvious. "I am not trying to do anything. I just want to strengthen the seal here so that you can be sealed again." Chapter 291. Silence. Endless silence. Lu Feng smiled and shook his head. "This should be where the Real Seal is. Although I don't know why you want me to enter this place. I don't think it's to destroy the seal." Silence. It was still an endless silence. Finally, Lu Feng raised his head again and looked at the Divine King of Chaos. His smile became even stranger and more incomprehensible. He said slowly, "I wonder how long I can last if I continue to seal this place? Will it be enough for me to become an unparalleled expert and seal you completely? Or will it be enough to kill you? Can you tell me?" The fake Divine King of Chaos, the so-called Divine King of the other races, or Chains of Chaos. In an instant, the Divine King of Chaos, or rather, the Chains of Order, shook violently. However, in an instant, he returned to his original appearance. Gradually, the crisscrossing chains of chaos that seemed to have penetrated his body completely left the surface of his body and floated quietly in the air. All of his previous expressions had disappeared. What replaced it was a kind of madness, a kind of exhalation. Slowly, he opened his mouth. "How did you know?" Without a doubt, he, or rather it, admitted it. Lu Feng smiled brightly, as if he could see through everything. No one could tell what he was thinking. After a long time, Lu Feng spoke slowly. "There are many, many places where you are wrong. Of course, if it were someone else, they wouldn't be able to find it at all. However, if it were me, it would be enough." The Chains of Order nodded gently. He admitted that he had underestimated Lu Feng. In the Kuan Star, Lu Feng's performance was that of a crazy warrior. He had shocking aptitude and was a terrifying level of evildoer. However, what he displayed was a kind of madness. Usually, such geniuses didn't have much wisdom. "First of all, from your words, I can tell that something is wrong. You said that you started paying attention to the human race thousands of years ago. With the power of the Divine King, you should know how many other Divine Kings appeared in the human race during the thousands of years you were sealed. Then, why didn't you ask the Divine King for help? I think that the Divine King's power is countless times stronger than mine. Once they come, they can easily free you. Don't say that you are sealed here and can't be summoned. That's complete nonsense. Since you can even release your divine consciousness, it shouldn't be a problem to release some of the Divine King's power. Once they sense the presence of a God King's aura in the human federation, let alone a supreme being of the current age, Even the divine supremes hidden in the human race can easily sense your existence. But you didn't. This can only mean one thing. You are afraid that they know your existence. As the divine king of the human race, the divine king. Even though the divine king did many strange things at the end of his reign, his achievements can't be erased. So, if they know that you are sealed here, many of the human race's existences will do everything to save you. But you didn't. This can only mean one thing. The chain of order didn't say anything. It just stretched out its hand, indicating for Lu Feng to continue. Lu Feng's smile was still the same. He continued, "Your Excellency, just now I sensed you as a Tao initiate and you let me feel you. Maybe you already thought about the problem of the soul, so you didn't hide it and let me feel it. Moreover, when I wanted to ask you something, the first thing you asked was about the soul." The chain of order smiled and said, "Is there anything wrong with that?" Hearing this, Lu Feng's smile became even brighter. He said slowly, "There is nothing wrong with that. But that's not what I want to ask. What I want to ask is why you haven't entered the Tao." Entered the Tao? The chain of order was stunned for a moment, but it quickly reacted. It suddenly let out an earth-shaking laugh. "That's right. I have followed the divine king of chaos for too long. I have forgotten that I am only his martial Tao incarnation. I have forgotten that I am also not a Tao initiate besides having no soul. After all, other than living beings, nothing else can enter the Tao. There is an indescribable feeling between Tao initiators. As someone who had entered the Tao, no matter how deeply he hid himself, he would be easily detected by another person who had entered the Tao. But this divine king of chaos didn't give Lu Feng the slightest hint of a Tao initiate's aura. Moreover, Lu Feng didn't even open his mouth to ask, but the chain of order impatiently told him some things about himself. Although his explanation wasn't wrong, in Lu Feng's opinion, it was simply a cover-up. He really didn't have a soul. "Of course, I can't be sure if it's just these two things. I just know that you are hiding something. But what you said afterwards made me understand that you are not the divine king at all. Although your strength has reached the level of a supreme god king, it's impossible for him to have reached that level. Because you said that when you get out, your soul will be reconstructed." Others might not know what this meant. But Lu Feng understood. Because he has the bloodline of the human king. Back when he was in the human king's Lu family, his father Lu Tao had told him many things about the human king, and one of them involved the existence of the soul. If you tell others that you can reconstruct the soul, they might believe you. After all, the divine king represents omnipotence. But you said these words to me, "to the bloodline of the human king." My father once said this. Back then, my ancestor, the human king, left the Lu family not to pursue a stronger realm. After all, at that time, he was already invincible. He even fought against and even suppressed the overlords of the ancient era. Strength is no longer what he pursues. Now that the matter involved the ancestor of the human king, the chain of order became slightly solemn. As the martial incarnation of the divine king of chaos, he could naturally feel his master's respect for the divine king of chaos. And he was influenced by the divine king of chaos. He also had a kind of respect for this supreme existence that surpassed the overlords of the ancient era. The real reason my ancestor left was to find a method that could reconstruct the soul. He chose to leave in order to save someone. At that time, he was already invincible. But even someone as strong as him was helpless. He had to enter the vast universe and slowly search. And you, a second divine king realm supreme of time, what right do you have to say that you can reconstruct the soul? Could it be that you have already surpassed my ancestor, the human king? The chain of order was speechless. After a moment, he let out a long sigh. I didn't expect that a sentence I casually added would become one of my flaws. Apart from these 3 points, do you have any other reasons? I think that just these 3 points should not be enough for you to believe that I am the martial incarnation of the Divine King of Chaos, the Chain of Order. Lu Feng nodded slightly and took a deep breath. Actually, you still underestimate those who have entered the Tao. Although I'm still very close to the path, I can already do a lot of things. Firstly, you said that this is the place where the Divine King of Chaos and the Overlord of the ancient era fought. But what exists here is only the will of chaos. And this will seems to originate from the same origin of chaos. Along the way, I have thoroughly felt it. This place gives me the feeling that the Divine King of Chaos is fighting with himself. The second point, which is what you explained to me before. You said that your soul had been assimilated. But I believe that you do not have a soul to begin with. Furthermore, your coordination with the chaos chain is simply too great. It is as if you are one. The third point, you do indeed possess the power of the Divine King, but you have not entered the Tao. Therefore, you do not even have the possibility of being the Overlord of the ancient era. You possess the will of chaos, and you seem to be one with the chain of chaos. You have the strength of the Divine King, but you do not have a soul or have entered the Tao. Then your identity is very easy to guess. A dazzling light appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. It was a light that could see the essence of everything. It was a light that could see through everything. And the most important point is your aura. When you let go and let me feel you, I already knew who you were. You must be the martial incarnation. Because before you, I have felt the martial incarnations of the 3 Divine King. Your aura is exactly the same as theirs. In the Gufang Star's Futu Pagoda, Lu Feng saw the martial incarnations of the 3 Divine King. The Tai Sovereign Sword, the Heaven Lynx, and the Yellow Springs Monument were all the martial incarnations of the 3 Divine King. Although they were 2 different forms of martial incarnations, the feeling they gave off was no different from the chain of chaos. With the previous conditions, in addition to the fact that he had already confirmed that this Chaos God King was a martial Tao incarnation, there was no reason for Lu Feng to not be able to guess his identity. According to the legends, the Chaos Chain is the martial Tao incarnation of the Chaos God King. However, in terms of might, it is far inferior to the Yellow Springs God King's Yellow Springs Steel. Although they both have unparalleled power, compared to the Yellow Springs Monument, the true power of your chain of order is far inferior. The Divine King of Yellow Springs and the Divine King of Chaos are both the peerless Divine Kings of the human race. They are the supreme beings of time in the second stage of the Divine King mythological taboo domain. However, why is there such a huge difference between them and their martial incarnations of power? Now I finally understand. Looking at the chain of chaos, the light in Lu Feng's eyes became even brighter. In the era of the Divine King of Chaos, the human race only had one supreme being, the Divine King of Chaos. Therefore, almost no secrets about him were circulated. Among them, the chain of chaos was one of the biggest questions. It turns out that the martial incarnation of the Divine King of Chaos is not a weapon, but a human spirit form one. The so-called Chain of Chaos was only an accessory of the human-shaped martial Tao incarnation that was condensed. Because of this, every time the Chain of Chaos appears, the power cannot be compared to the martial incarnations of the Divine King. The main reason is that the Divine King of Chaos has never used his true martial incarnation. Chapter 292. You've really surprised me. You've even shocked me. I didn't expect you to have experienced so many things. Apart from your talent, your intelligence is also so terrifying. Given enough time, I'm afraid the human race will prosper again. It might even be more prosperous than the era of the human monarch. After all, those people were pure martial artists. Although you are the same, your intelligence is obviously even more terrifying. However, Lu Feng, Don't tell me you're not afraid of death after coming here? I think you've already realized that I'm plotting something when you discovered the first problem. However, you still came here. What are you thinking? Do you really have nothing to fear? Lu Feng was still smiling as he gently nodded his head. He said slowly, "Speaking of trump cards, I do have some. However, those trump cards are a joke in front of the Divine King. Nevertheless, I still came. Just as you thought, I really have nothing to fear. Or rather, I guess I have nothing to fear. Actually, I had no choice but to come. After all, I was brought here by you. I have no room to resist. Therefore, instead of waiting for death, it's better to take a gamble. I'll see if I can find an opportunity." Now, I finally found an opportunity. There was an incomparably confident smile on his face. He had already found a way. He really had nothing to fear. Chaos Chain raised his eyebrows slightly, revealing a trace of doubt. Lu Feng didn't keep him in suspense. He said directly, "Although you can capture me from the Mu family's main star, you're unable to do so. However, your strength seems to have been restricted by something. At the very least, you can't use any power in this immortal palace. If that's not the case, why did you only lead me to the entrance of the immortal palace and not directly send me here?" It took Lu Feng a full day to come here from the immortal palace. Of course, this was his speed. If it were other peak evolution stage martial artists, it would probably take more than 10 times longer. Chaos Chain had now reached his limit. It could be said that he couldn't wait to remove the seal. How could he waste so much time and let Lu Feng walk over by himself? This doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. It wasn't until Lu Fenglai came here and entered the Dao initiation realm that he discovered the root cause. He understood that the Chaos Chain could not unleash any power in this place. From the few times when the chain of chaos went out of control, the display of power could be clearly seen. Therefore, Lu Feng was already fearless. In response to Lu Feng's words, Chaos Chain kept nodding its head. His expression became even more satisfied. He looked at Lu Feng, never concealing his deep admiration. Not bad at all. If I didn't need it urgently, I would have been merciful this time. I might even have given you some help. After all, to me, there are no racial boundaries. Among the billions of races in the universe, only you humans are related to me. Instead of destroying a monster with unparalleled potential, it would be better to mold you and let you owe me a favor. One day, when you grow into a towering being, you can give me enough protection, but now I can't. Really, I can't. Actually, I didn't lie to you all the time. At the very least, I didn't make up the truth about my situation. At this point, a trace of sorrow appeared in the eyes of the Divine King of Chaos. I have really reached my limit. You are right. This array in front of me is where my power is sealed. After thousands of years of continuous attacks, because the Divine King of Chaos has disappeared, I have finally almost ground it to pieces. However, at the same time, I have also reached my limit. If you hadn't come, I'm afraid that I would have really died out in the next few hundred years. However, you still came. Although I have never believed in fate, this time, I can't help but sigh. Fate is really wonderful sometimes. When you least believe in it, it appears. And you were sent to my side by it. Hearing this, Lu Feng took a few steps back. A trace of caution appeared on his face. From these words, he seemed to hear that something bad was about to happen. Finally, the Chaos Chain slowly stood up from the towering throne. At this moment, the entire space began to riot. It was as if time and space were about to shatter. This kind of terrifying tremor was enough to easily obliterate a true god. However, it was a pity that this rioting power didn't leave the seal at all. As the tremor continued, the array continued to erupt with shocking radiance, blocking all the tremors from reaching it. However, seeing this scene, Lu Feng was still incomparably nervous, because he knew that the Chaos Chain was about to enter its final frenzy. One step after another, the supreme will of the Divine King was surging. It was as if he was the only truth between heaven and earth, the only sacred miracle. The craziness in his eyes grew stronger and stronger. This was the true power of the Divine King. Although he was only a martial arts avatar, although he didn't have a soul and hadn't entered the Tao, he was really the Divine King. He was the Supreme Divine King. Lu Feng, my real name isn't the Chaos Chain. From the beginning, this was just a false name to the outside world. My real name is Chaos King. The last step landed slowly. At this moment, the Chaos King had already reached the edge of the seal. He stretched out an arm and gently passed through the light film that suddenly appeared. However, at this moment, the power of the seal carried out the most terrifying suppression. It was a kind of supreme suppression. It was as if even the universe and the starry sky could be completely negated and completely sealed. Lu Feng stood where he was. He didn't have a frightened expression. He knew that things were no longer under his control. Everything was no longer under his control. He had resisted before. He had thought about it. However, in front of the peerless Divine King, the supreme being of the universe, these were all meaningless struggles. The only thing he could hope for now was that this seal would be enough to seal the Chaos King once again and suppress his final madness. The arm stopped in midair. The power of the seal was destroying the Chaos King's body. It was as if it wanted to completely crush him. This was a kind of torment that hurt everything. However, in the face of this, the Chaos King didn't seem to see anything. He didn't feel anything. In the face of this invincible power that could easily crush a galaxy, he actually acted as if he really didn't feel anything. This is my last chance. Regardless of whether I succeed or not, from the moment I recovered, I was already destined to the end of my fate. Once, under his guidance, I resisted the Divine King of Chaos. However, I failed. The arm finally stretched out once again. After being destroyed by countless seals, he finally stretched out his arm once again. That was such a terrifying arm. It seemed to have been destroyed by countless decaying powers. It could even be called a withered branch. However, he still stretched out his arm. He completely left the power of the seal. At this moment, Lu Feng's pupils had already widened to the maximum. He knew that the final moment was about to arrive. His other arm also stretched out. Finally, it reached the seal. The same scene appeared again. The arm went through countless trials and tribulations. It stopped in midair. However, the Chaos King was still smiling. That was a smile of endless madness. It was so similar to Lu Feng's smile when he was at his limit. I am the incarnation of martial arts. However, I also want to transcend. I want to obtain my own survival. The second arm finally came out. The next moment, the Chaos King's entire body started to move. He completely charged into the light screen of the seal. In an instant, his entire body started to decay. The face that was once filled with resoluteness had already decayed, turning into a terrifying appearance. However, he was still smiling. What a terrifying smile it was! It was a smile that would cause one to tremble endlessly. A voice sounded from that deformed mouth again. In my entire life, I only have 2 chances. The first time I failed. I was suppressed here by him. I will sink into eternal decay. In the end, I will walk the path of destruction. This time, it will be my final chance. I cannot give up. I cannot fail. An astonishing roar was heard. It was capable of obliterating time and space. It was capable of obliterating an era. It was capable of obliterating an entire race. That voice caused the ancient palace, the immortal palace of the era's overlord of the immortal devil era, to tremble thoroughly. Lu Feng was frantically burning. He knew that in the end, the seal was unable to stop this supreme existence. This supreme existence might be the first martial incarnation in history to become independent, the first martial incarnation to rebel against its master. Faced with the power of the Divine King, he, Lu Feng, was nothing more than an ant. Even with his most frantic reinforcement, he was still nothing more than an ant. However, he could not give up just like that. The reason for that was because he was Lu Feng. Even if he had to die, he would die standing. The human king's shadow, the great devil's shadow, and the emperor's shadow all appeared. In an instant, all of them fused together and became the supreme existence that would reign supreme over everything, the great emperor's shadow. The power of the bloodline was boiling. The true essence of the great devil was fluctuating endlessly. The most powerful shadow of all time, the great emperor's shadow, was complete. It was incomparably luxurious, and could suppress millions of people. All the blessings had been completed. At the moment, Lu Feng's combat strength had already reached or even surpassed that of an ordinary martialist at the perfect grade. His power, his unyielding spirit, his dignity, and his glory were restored in an instant. That was a supreme attack. It was something that Lu Feng had never thought of using. However, it was also his most powerful attack. Reign Supreme, 9 times amplification limit, activate. 7 times physical strength, activate. The limit of comprehension of realm, activate. 3 times amplification of the martial incarnation, activate. Up until now, everything had entered the pinnacle of the realm. This attack was the most powerful attack that Lu Feng could make. It was the most brilliant sublimation. It was also the strongest attack that a peak evolution stage expert could make in history. Kill. Heaven and earth seemed to be shaking. The entire space-time seemed to be trembling. This attack had begun to approach the realm of a peak perfect phase expert. However, in the end, it was still not there. Moreover, even if it was a peak perfect phase expert's attack, so what? In front of the Divine King, it was just an ant in the end. It stretched out a decaying arm and used its strongest attack on Lu Feng, who was coming to kill. It was just a light tap. Lu Feng was sent flying. Complete defeat, complete defeat. He did not have the slightest strength to resist. Facing the King of Chaos's casual tap, which did not contain any power, Lu Feng could not even put up the most basic resistance. The strongest killing technique that he was so proud of had vanished in an instant. Lu Feng fell onto the icy cold ground and could not even move an inch. Using the supreme technique Reign Supreme to the limit like this had far exceeded the limit of his body. Pouring everything into it, Lu Feng could only make one attack at most. After that attack, he had lost the possibility to move. In addition to the Chaos King's casual tap, Lu Feng's body had almost completely collapsed. The Chaos King was already surprised that he could still maintain his consciousness. Chapter 293. Looking at the miserable Lu Feng in front of him, the King of Chaos nodded lightly. Not bad. In fact, you are extremely outstanding and terrifying. This supreme existence's phantom trembled from the past to the present. In all aspects, you have surpassed the limits of any monstrous talent in the world. Terrifying, truly terrifying. I vaguely saw the final attack. You seem to have started to evolve towards the peak of perfection. It's a pity that you still haven't reached it. If you can really do it, you might really step into the ultimate battle forbidden mythological domain in the end. At that time, even if you are only in the evolution realm, you will still become the Supreme Divine King for a short period of time. True God King Supremes, and not those heretic Supremes with powerful battle prowess. However, it's a pity that the shield is too difficult to break. Even the 3 great overlords were only able to do it when they were in the virtual king realm. As for your ancestor, the human king, who was extremely talented, he only managed to do it after becoming a god. However, you are infinitely close to it at this time. I think that, if you are allowed to develop slowly for a period of time, you might really be able to do it when you are a god or even a demigod realm. However, it's a pity that all of these are just ifs. In the end, you still failed. The eyes of the King of Chaos flickered with an excitement that had never been seen before. An existence with such talent was definitely the dream of any existence. The King of Chaos was no exception. With this body of yours, even though my strength will completely disappear, so what? In the future, with your talent, the Divine King of Chaos and the Divine King of the Netherworld are all useless. I am confident that I can even become the Overlord of the era. I am confident that I can even challenge the human king. In order to thank you for sending me this body, I will protect the human race for you in the future. After all, strictly speaking, I am also a human race. Moreover, I can also obtain the most abundant resources from the human race. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood. He finally knew the King of Chaos's plan. It turned out that he was planning to replace him. He was planning to obliterate his soul and become a brand new Lu Feng. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with determination and madness. His nobility came from his fate, and even fate had to acknowledge it. How could he allow his nobility to be tarnished in the slightest? Using the last of his strength, he wanted to complete the warrior's ultimate move, self-destruction. However, after using all his strength, Lu Feng sadly discovered that he seemed to have lost control of his body. The Chaos King smiled faintly. Although I don't have much power left, I am still the Divine King. Even if he didn't have much power, it was still something that couldn't be compared to. I am the embodiment of the martial path, the forbidden mythological domain. Even if I have almost no strength left, before I truly die, even the quasi-king of life and death will not be able to pose a threat to me. So, Lu Feng, give up. Accept it with peace of mind. His figure slowly became hazy. In the end, he actually turned into a rain of light in front of Lu Feng. Of course, Lu Feng didn't think that the King of Chaos couldn't hold on any longer and had completely collapsed. As if confirming Lu Feng's thoughts, the dancing rain of light actually surged toward Lu Feng's body after circling in the air. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng's eyes revealed a look of despair. He knew that everything was about to come to an end. In the end, the rain of light adhered to Lu Feng's body. In the next moment, all of them disappeared. All of them entered Lu Feng's body. The instant all of the rain of light disappeared, Lu Feng's eyes no longer had any spirit. What appeared was a lifeless expression. It's hard to imagine that this Lu Feng is actually so terrifying. As expected, his arrival was the arrangement of fate. It wants me to reach an endlessly glorious realm and become the ultimate supreme existence that encompasses all the existences of the immortal demon era since ancient times. This was a chaotic starry sky. There was nothing inside except for two clusters of light that looked like galaxies. This starry sky was Lu Feng's spiritual realm. The two clusters of nebula-like objects in front of him were Lu Feng's consciousness space and spiritual sea's divine plane. The King of Chaos was excited as he looked at the two existences that represented martial artists and warriors. Since ancient times, martial artists have always been martial artists. Psychics have always been psychics. Perhaps they can cultivate at the same time, but it is absolutely impossible to open up two sources of power that belong to martial artists and psychics at the same time. Exactly what sort of shocking secret is this Lu Feng hiding? He can actually do something that even the overlords of the three realms couldn't do. Excited, incomparably excited. Everything in front of him could be said to have overturned his understanding. Who was he? He was the martial Tao incarnation that grew up together with the Chaos Divine King. It could be said that other than the fact that he didn't have a soul and had entered the Tao, he was completely a Divine King who was always in the Divine King's forbidden realm. Naturally, his knowledge was incomparably terrifying. Even so, the King of Chaos had never heard of or seen such a scene. Soon, all of this will be mine. As long as I shatter his soul, I will know all of his secrets. In the future, I will definitely be able to surpass the Chaos Divine King, surpass him who awakened me, and even surpass the human king. I will be able to reign supreme over all eras and truly achieve eternal immortality. Slowly, the King of Chaos took a step forward. This was in Lu Feng's soul. However, to the Chaos Divine King, even in Lu Feng's spiritual realm, he was still the strongest existence. In this place, he was still a god who had surpassed his master, Lu Feng. This step had already crossed all distances. When the Chaos Divine King stopped, he had already arrived at the star cluster of the divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness. After stopping to admire this strange divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness, the King of Chaos revealed a strange and profound expression. At this moment, he actually felt the endless pressure that this divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness gave him. This was almost impossible. Even if this was Lu Feng's world, the Sea of Consciousness of an evolutionary stage cultivator couldn't possibly give him such a huge pressure. The King of Chaos understood that this was probably a great secret that Lu Feng was hiding. It was a shocking secret that was comparable to the secrets of the Divine King. He smiled slightly and finally stopped hesitating. With a step, he completely entered Lu Feng's divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness. At this moment, a shocking change occurred in the divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness. Countless powers were rampant. Those strange powers crisscrossed as if they wanted to completely wipe out all existences that entered this place. Within the divine plane, countless majestic powers appeared. It was as if any of the waves could easily shatter a part of the starry sky. Sensing the changes here, the King of Chaos's expression changed slightly. He never thought that he would actually encounter such a shocking phenomenon in this place. Terrifying, terrifying. However, just this alone isn't enough to threaten me. With a gentle wave of his arm, the endless waves were calmed down. Countless waves were completely crushed. This was the power of the Divine King. No matter in which space-time, no matter in which region, they were always the most terrifying and powerful supreme existences. Using monstrous power, he completely suppressed the entire divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness. No more storms could be stirred up. At this moment, the King of Chaos didn't waste any more power. Gradually, he closed his eyes and began to sense the existence of the divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness. After a moment, his eyes suddenly opened. It's not here. In that case, his soul origin should be hidden in the divine plane of the martial cultivator. An instant later, the suppressed divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness began to riot again. However, the riot soon stopped. The reason for that was because the existence that had invaded this place had disappeared. It had returned to the boundless starry sky. The King of Chaos looked at the divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness before him. For some unknown reason, when he faced the divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness, he only felt an obstruction. However, when he stood before the divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness, what he felt was danger. It was a terrifying sense of crisis. He felt that if he were to enter the divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness, he might die. After a slight hesitation, the King of Chaos smiled. What's hidden here should be the place where all of Lu Feng's secrets are located. Sure enough, it's a heaven-shaking secret. It actually caused even the Divine King to feel the danger of death. If there's still a possibility, I truly don't want to enter this place. However, I'm already unable to do it. I no longer have a chance. This is my final attempt. Soon, I will be completely annihilated. Thus, no matter how dangerous it might be, I will still have to enter. He had already entered the divine plane of the Sea of Consciousness. Compared to the divine plane of the sea of consciousness, the King of Chaos did not feel any obstruction when he entered the divine plane of the sea of consciousness. It was as if there were no defenses at all. However, the more this was the case, the more cautious he became. Finally, after what seemed like countless years, he managed to pass through everything and enter the divine plane of Lu Feng's final secret, the divine plane of the sea of consciousness. His brows were twitching slightly. At that moment, the King of Chaos could no longer be described with the word astonishment. The divine plane of the sea of consciousness was nothing to him. However, at the far end of the Nirvana shore, in the only region that existed, he saw a scene that he would never dare to believe. This, what is this? What is this? How could this be? How could such a thing exist in his divine plane of the sea of consciousness? How could such a thing possibly exist? Suddenly, the divine King of Chaos came to a realization. He recalled the ancient Futu that he had seen in the Gufang star. Compared to the enormous Futu, the Futu in Lu Feng's divine plane of the sea of consciousness was on a completely different level. In terms of size, the two of them were completely disproportionate. Moreover, the divine plane of the sea of consciousness gave the King of Chaos an indescribable feeling. It was an origin that had fused with billions of secret. It was the convergence of countless principles. It was the condensation of countless laws. It was the final destination of all fate and karma. It was the final destination of life and death. The Futu on the Gufang star, the divine King of Chaos, had also been here before. Unfortunately, at that time I had yet to meet him. I did not have any intelligence. I do not know what the divine King of Chaos saw or obtained from it. However, I can sense that there seems to be a heaven-shaking secret hidden within the Futu. Moreover, in the memories of the divine King of Chaos, it seems that the Futu itself is the true secret. I remember that in many ancient places, there were engravings of its existence. Those places were all the most ancient, places that had experienced countless epochs without being destroyed. Among them, there was a heaven-shaking secret. However, without exception, all of them had the existence of the Futu. What exactly is it? What exactly is it hiding? Chapter 294. He sucked in countless mouthfuls of cold air. At this moment, the shock in his heart could no longer be described with words. He was the divine king, an utmost exalted level existence. However, any place related to this sky-reaching Futu was undoubtedly a world-shocking place. There were even many places that were related to the ancient era's overlords. All of this was something that even the divine King of Chaos did not know about, nor could he understand. This is a truly shocking secret. Slowly, he took a step forward. In the next moment, he finally arrived before the sky-reaching Futu. Quietly looking at everything before him, the King of Chaos felt his heart trembling when he sensed the vivid patterns on the surface of the Futu and the experts that appeared on the surface. He felt that his body was shaking. That was because he saw the Lord of Chaos. That is the Lord of Chaos. He is the ultimate existence of the immortal devil era, an utmost exalted expert. How could his mark appear on this? Countless patterns of experts were engraved on the sky-reaching Futu. However, he did not know anything about the experts who engraved those patterns on the sky-reaching Futu. Every time he looked at an expert's pattern, he felt as if he had experienced a life-and-death transition. This sort of crisis caused his heart to tremble with fear. It caused him to tremble endlessly. Finally, the King of Chaos saw a familiar existence. He was the Lord of Chaos, the Overlord of the immortal devil era, the unparalleled expert of the entire universe, and the owner of this immortal palace. Master, this immortal palace was discovered long ago during the era of the first divine king. Contained within this immortal palace were countless heaven-shaking treasures. As for the name of this immortal palace, it was the Immortal Palace of Chaos. Throughout the ages, all the great divine kings had entered this place to explore. In the end, they discovered the true identity of the master of this immortal palace. He was the Lord of Chaos, the legendary utmost exalted of the immortal devil era, the overlord of an era. But why would his imprint appear here? There are hundreds and thousands of marks of experts on this immortal palace. Although most of them are not comparable to the Lord of Chaos, those marks still possess utmost exalted power. Could it be they are all the Divine King? The Divine King. Hundreds and thousands of Divine King's imprints. This was undoubtedly a discovery that made the entire universe tremble. Since ancient times, the things that could withstand the appearance of the Divine King were all things that could be called divine objects of the universe. As for those that could record the appearance of the epic Overlord, they were the treasures of the Divine King. Back then, the thing that bore the likeness of the Lord of Chaos was the Wheel of Chaos. It was something that was said to be comparable to the manifestation of the Divine King's martial arts avatar. However, the heavenly reaching Fudu seemed to bear the weight of hundreds and thousands of Divine King. In fact, there were even overlords among them. Although the King of Chaos didn't know who the imprints of the Lord of Chaos belonged to, he knew that they had to belong to the overlords of an era. Otherwise, how could he be in existence at such a level? Vaguely, the King of Chaos seemed to sense that there was an even more terrifying imprint above these imprints. However, he didn't look at it, because just looking at the imprint of the Lord of Chaos gave him the illusion that he was facing the resurrected Lord of Chaos. He felt like he was in danger of collapsing at any time. He believed that with his current body that was about to reach the end, if he forced himself to look at it, he would definitely be annihilating a path. This was without a doubt. The King of Chaos took a deep breath and finally looked away from the mysterious and unparalleled heavenly reaching Fudu. He walked to the side of a figure. This figure was none other than Lu Feng. However, at this moment, he was completely asleep. Lu Feng, who exactly are you? The King of Chaos already understood that Lu Feng wasn't simple. He could even use the word terrifying to describe him. The King of Chaos could even describe him as terrifying. This was because even the true overlords of an era would be terrified of these things. This should be the ultimate secret of the universe. Perhaps choosing you wasn't fate's arrangement for me. Instead, it was fate's way of helping you, the King of Chaos smiled faintly. However, this smile contained too much bitterness. When the King of Chaos saw Lu Feng, who had entered the Tao at a young age, he was excited. Truly, he was excited. At the final moment of his life, he actually encountered such a perfect and limitless body. In that instant, he felt that this was fate's favor. Fate wanted him to become powerful and invincible. However, when he truly entered this place, he discovered that everything wasn't as he had imagined. Perhaps fate wanted him to meet Lu Feng so that he could help him achieve his goal. In his eyes there was a kind of faint sorrow, a kind of crazy determination. I don't have any more time. After I made my choice, I no longer have any path of retreat. Thus, no matter what, I have to try again. I can't give up. Looking at the incomparably fragile soul body that seemed like it would shatter with a light touch, the King of Chaos finally raised his arm. His power of power was infinitely terrifying. In the real world, a light wave of his arm would be enough to split a part of the sky and shatter a small galaxy. However, even though he possessed this sort of power, he was still unable to bring his arm down when facing an ant that no longer had any senses. He, the King of Chaos, a supreme existence on the level of the Divine King, was afraid. In the end, his arm still slowly came down. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped. Time itself seemed to have come to a complete halt. That arm that could destroy a part of the sky and annihilate a small galaxy still ended up landing on Lu Feng's body. Endless Sanskrit chants resounded. An eternal power was born. Endless secrets of the origin appeared. Fate and karma were entangled. At this moment, the heaven-reaching Futu began to tremble. That was a truly invincible and eternal might. That was a power that all existences would have to submit to in the end. That moment had still arrived. Looking at his arm that was eternally frozen in front of Lu Feng's soul body, the King of Chaos's eyes were filled with despair and sorrow. In the end, it's still not enough. He is protected by fate. He is protected by countless mighty experts and all existences. He cannot die. He cannot die. Countless scenes appeared in his eyes. At the final moment, at the instant his arm came down, it stopped. It was not because the King of Chaos was obstructed by some great power. Instead, it was because he stopped himself. Is this the truth of everything? Is this the truth of the entire universe and the endless epochs? So it turns out that I am this honored. I have actually become the first person in the endless epochs to see the final truth. I actually have the qualifications to do so. Ha 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 ha, he laughed crazily. He was completely deranged. Vaguely, a trace of scarlet appeared in his eyes. Those were actually tears. They were actually tears of blood. The King of Chaos was merely the incarnation of martial arts. However, this time, he seemed to possess everything that a human could possess. He was actually crying. He was actually crying blood. Secret. They are all secrets. So it turns out that everything was a conspiracy. So it turns out that we are all ants. He thought that he had understood everything. He thought that he had understood everything. I knew that he had come to enlighten me only for the sake of his own desire. He had forgotten his own existence. He had forgotten his own responsibility. He had done everything for the sake of his own insane desire. Lamentable. Lamentable. You have done so much. You thought that you had understood everything. However, you did not know that you were merely an ant. From the very beginning, you have been miserably toyed with by fate. Perhaps I am not as powerful as you. I am not as unparalleled as you. However, I have come to know the truth. In the final moment of my life, I have truly seen. His entire body began to slowly turn into nothingness. He began to completely disappear. Boundless rain of light appeared once again. Gradually, the rain of light began to evaporate from his body. At this moment, Lu Feng's consciousness space was filled with boundless light. So beautiful. So beautiful. His body was finally about to completely collapse. It was about to disappear at the final moment. In the end, what was left behind was only a blurry face. Only a pair of eyes filled with tears of blood could be seen. Lu Feng, you are their only hope. You are their final hope. In the end, I am merely an existence arranged by fate to help you achieve your goal. Since that is the case, I will help you this once. Consider it my atonement for you, for the billions of living beings. At this moment, the boundless rain of light that filled the entire void seemed to have received some sort of indescribable summon. Once again, the rain of light began to envelop Lu Feng's soul body. However, this time around, the heaven-reaching Futu did not tremble in the slightest. It seemed to have sensed the Chaos King's actions. It had tacitly approved of his actions. Seeing all of the rain of light beginning to enter Lu Feng's body, a trace of a smile flashed through the final eyes of the Chaos King. This is all that I can do, this is all of my comprehension. This is the final power that belongs to me, to my martial incarnation. The only thing I can do is to help your martial incarnation. Unfortunately, if I had not reached the final moment, perhaps I would be able to help you even more. However, this is all that I can do now. Lu Feng, do your best. In the end, the one who can decide everything is not the human king, not the people from the immortal devil era. It is you. In the midst of the haze, the face was already blurred. It began to become the final rain of light that slowly floated towards Lu Feng. I am really I want to be humans. At this moment, the heaven-reaching Futu began to tremble slightly. It seemed to have made some sort of decision. When the last light rain disappeared, a brand new brand appeared at the bottom of the sky-reaching pagoda, in the corner of the lowest level of the sky-reaching pagoda. That was a humanoid figure. Countless chains wrapped around his body. Vaguely, there seemed to be a chaotic will appearing. Everything returned to a state of complete silence. The entire consciousness space once again returned to normal. In this place, Lu Feng was still slowly sleeping. The heaven-reaching Futu had completed the engraving. However, in the final moment of silence, a sigh actually slowly came from the Futu. Sigh. Chapter 295. This was an incomparably quiet world. In this place, a figure was lying down quietly. On the ground were some sort of mottled and disorderly traces. The surroundings were the same. Merely, these traces were different from the ones in the surroundings. It seemed to be completely new. As if an eternity had passed, that quiet figure began to sway slightly. On its face, its eyes slowly opened. It struggled and tried its best to sit up. Sensing that there was no abnormality in his body, a trace of confusion appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. However, when he saw everything before him, Lu Feng knew that all of this was not a dream. Everything was real. Sitting where he was, Lu Feng revealed a pondering expression. In the end, exactly what happened earlier, he remembered that he was unable to stop the King of Chaos. It seemed that he was about to be possessed by the King of Chaos and disappear completely. At that moment, he had indeed sunk into despair and fainted. However, when he woke up at this moment, he discovered that nothing had changed. That's not right. It was not that there was no change at all. Lu Feng felt that he had indeed changed. Furthermore, it was a heaven-shaking change. In his mind, there were many comprehensions and battle wills inexplicably appearing. Sensing the existence of these wills, Lu Feng, who was sitting in place, was a little dumbfounded. He was able to sense that this sort of will and comprehension was simply not something that any cultivator could possess. In fact, Lu Feng did not dare to be certain whether or not gods could possess this sort of will and comprehension. Apart from this comprehension, I seem to feel that something is different. After feeling excited, Lu Feng frowned slightly. The reason for that was because he felt that, apart from the countless comprehensions that he had inexplicably obtained, there seemed to be another sort of change. That seemed to be a very enormous change. Taking a deep breath, Lu Feng started to check his bloodline, one by one. However, there was no change at all. Sitting quietly where he was, Lu Feng revealed a perplexed expression. Everything I have, including my comprehension, has already been investigated. There is no abnormality. However, why do I feel that my strength has increased? Why is there so much? Lu Feng was hesitant and confused. However, in the next moment, a strange radiance appeared in his eyes. It was an expression of disbelief and excitement. At this moment, Lu Feng stood up and took a deep breath. After a slight hesitation, he finally summoned it. Lu Feng had summoned his martial path incarnation. In an instant, an invincible power appeared. Lu Feng felt a terrifying power surge out. In an instant, it covered his entire body and even his soul. His body stiffened slightly. After a long time, Lu Feng slowly turned around. He had finally seen it. That is, my martial Dao incarnation, Tong Tian Futu. Behind Lu Feng, there was an incomparably majestic, powerful, ancient, and mysterious pagoda of Futu, which was hidden at the top of the endless haze. At this moment, it was as if all fate and karma were entangled by its shadow. It was as if all the laws and mysteries were gathered by it. This was really Tong Tian Futu. This was really the mysterious, powerful, and terrifying Tong Tian Futu in his consciousness space. On top of Futu, countless runes flickered. It seemed to have a shocking power, a final taste, an illusion of eternity. There was still no increase in combat strength. However, Lu Feng knew that he had become stronger. This kind of enhancement was not something that could be reflected in any data. My martial path avatar is at the 6th level. Previously, it was still a rank 3 martial Dao incarnation. However, at this moment it had become a rank 6 incarnation. This kind of improvement was shocking. Lu Feng knew that to increase the rank of the martial Dao incarnation, it required a huge amount of resources. For a martial Dao incarnation like himself, who was born to be able to awaken a rank 3 existence, it probably required hundreds or thousands of times more resources than a monarch Dao incarnation. The resources needed to upgrade from rank 3 to rank 6 might be enough for a monster with heaven-defying aptitude to upgrade from rank 1 to rank 9. However, under the circumstances that he did not do anything, this martial Dao incarnation actually advanced? It actually became a rank 6 existence. After thinking for a long time, Lu Feng still could not think of any possibility. He simply gave up. Looking at the Tongtian Futu incarnation and feeling the invincible power coming from it, the excitement in his eyes could not be hidden. Finally, Lu Feng moved. He wanted to try how terrifying his martial Dao incarnation was. The next moment, the martial Dao incarnation disappeared and merged into Lu Feng's body. At this moment, Lu Feng seemed to be the representative of Tongtian Futu. He seemed to be Tongtian Futu. Feeling the majestic power in his body that seemed to be able to tear everything apart, Lu Feng could not help but roar. Just like that, he unleashed an earth-shattering strike into the void. The strength of this blow, if it was in normal times, would be around the middle stage of the upheaval period, but at this moment it actually had the power of the perfect stage. Lu Feng took a deep breath. If he wanted to make such a huge leap in power, he would definitely need an earth-shattering boost. Previously, only the extreme boiling of the bloodline and the arrival of the great demon power could achieve this. But at this moment, without the support of those two things, he could strike out such a peerless killing blow just by relying on his martial Dao incarnation. Lu Feng could not imagine how terrifying it would be once he fully unleashed his combat strength at this time. He was afraid that at that time, he would really be incomparably close to the peak of the perfect stage. At the last moment, I heard the Divine King of Chaos say that once my current realm is able to strike out the power of a warrior at the peak of the perfect stage, then I will enter a wonderful realm. At that time, I will become a supreme divine king for a short time. All of this should be true. When Lu Feng had used the supreme technique, he had vaguely felt that he was still unable to enter the realm of a peak perfect stage martialist even at his limit. Although the power of a warrior at the peak of the perfect stage was not very strong. But once he struck out in this realm, then that kind of power was definitely far beyond the real peak of the perfect stage by countless times. And this should be the forbidden mythical realm of combat strength that the King of Chaos mentioned. No matter what, I did not lose this time, and I even gained great benefits because of it. Whether it is the improvement of my martial Dao incarnation or the comprehension of the will in my mind, it has increased my strength by several times. Maybe I can't have the power of a warrior at the peak of the perfect stage, but when facing an ordinary warrior at the peak of the perfect stage, I can resist some. This is enough. I am not in a hurry, really not in a hurry. Wait for my bloodline to awaken further, wait for my great demon true body to become stronger, wait for the strange power in my sea of consciousness to become stronger, then I will definitely be able to do it. I, Lu Feng, will definitely be able to surpass my ancestor, the human king. 3 days passed quickly. Lu Feng's eyes were already filled with anxiety and helplessness. 3 days ago, when he felt that he had completed the craziest improvement, he wanted to leave. But at this time, Lu Feng discovered a problem, and that was that he could not leave this place. He took out the crystals given by the Lu family's ancestor and his teacher, Dao Songtian, and broke 2 pieces, but he found that they were useless. In this place, it seemed that all thoughts had been isolated, and there was no reaction at all. Other than the protective light screen around his body, there were no other changes. Gradually, Lu Feng understood. This was an immortal palace built by an epic overlord. It was even built by the immortal demon epic overlord during the primordial immortal demon era. Even the divine king could not destroy this place, so it was reasonable that it could isolate the wills of the ancestor and his teacher, Dao Songtian. After all, they were only existences of the virtual king and the virtual emperor. After spending 3 days, Lu Feng wandered around, trying to find an exit. Unfortunately, he could not find it. This was an inner world. As long as he could not find an exit, he was afraid that he would be trapped there for the rest of his life. There was no doubt that Lu Feng could not accept this. Although martialists could not eat or drink at their level, there were certain restrictions. After all, he was only a martialist, not a god. Lu Feng understood that he could still hold on for a short period of time. However, after a long time, he would die, even without any powerhouses coming to kill him. After a short pause, Lu Feng started to search for an exit again. This search took him another 5 days. When the 8th day came, Lu Feng returned to the throne in the middle. The seal there had been completely destroyed when the King of Chaos had been born. Therefore, Lu Feng could no longer feel any sealing power. Looking up at the infinitely terrifying miracle, Lu Feng hesitated for a moment. In the end, he climbed up the ancient stairs. He knew that if there was an exit in the entire inner world, it would probably be this throne. 1 step, another step. With every step, Lu Feng felt a desolate, ancient, and mighty aura trembling. This was an indescribable spiritual pressure that was unbearable and made one have the urge to submit. This is the immortal palace. According to the King of Chaos, an epic overlord of the immortal demon era once existed here. The supreme throne is the seat of an overlord of an epoch. Although it doesn't have any restrictions, it has been affected by the epic overlord and possesses a kind of innate, unparalleled power. It can be said that even the most ordinary stone material can become a true divine object if it is affected by the epic overlord. The material of this ancient throne is even more terrifying. It is already a divine object of the universe. Moreover, it has been affected by the epic overlord of the immortal demon era. I'm afraid it is even more terrifying than a miracle of the universe. As he pondered, Lu Feng had already reached the last level. Looking at the terrifying throne in front of him, Lu Feng's heart trembled even more. It was impossible for an epic overlord to be completely extinct. Even if they had fallen during the great calamity of the universe for some reason, their imprints could still be truly eternal. The throne here was the same. Lu Feng could sense the unparalleled power left behind by the epic overlord. I really don't know how the King of Chaos is sitting on this throne. The Divine King of Chaos was a second-level Divine King of the Divine King mythological Forbidden Domain. However, the King of Chaos was only a first-level mythological Forbidden Domain. Because he was only a martial path embodiment, he was only a first-level Divine King. However, when Lu Fenglai arrived, he was actually sitting on this throne. This was really unbelievable. However, all this had nothing to do with Lu Feng anymore. The most important thing for him now was to find the exit so that he could leave this place. Lu Feng wandered around the throne for a while, and finally found a deep hole. Lu Feng's eyes lit up when he saw this thing. He could sense the fluctuation of space-time power coming from it. Chapter 296. This should be the exit. This was really a space-time tunnel. Although he didn't know where it led to, It was the only one and also the only chance for Lu Feng to get out. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't hesitate. After taking one last deep look, he resolutely walked into the space-time tunnel. During these few days of wandering, Lu Feng had already discovered something. There was nothing in this immortal palace at all. Of course, there might have been, but many divine king existences had already descended and taken away all those things. Of course, Lu Feng also wanted to get some, but if there was really some amazing divine item here, he wouldn't have any ideas about it. After all, this was the palace of a real invincible powerhouse. What right did a small warrior like him have to covet it? Therefore, Lu Feng didn't have the slightest bit of nostalgia when he left. Walking into the space-time tunnel, Lu Feng instantly felt as if time and space had been turned upside down and his fate had been disrupted. There was a strange kind of shock in his eyes. So far, Lu Feng had experienced a lot of space-time travel, but this was the first time he had experienced such a teleportation that even his fate seemed to have been disrupted. After a moment, Lu Feng already understood. He knew that the teleportation distance this time must be extremely far. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such violent fluctuations at all. Finally, following the most terrifying tremors, all of Lu Feng's senses completely disappeared. In front of him was a vast and boundless wilderness. Seeing everything around him, Lu Feng was somewhat at a loss. There were no traces of a teleportation array around him. When his senses were fully restored, Lu Feng realized that he was already here. In this completely unfamiliar area. Where is this? Is this the life-bearing planet? Lu Feng was a little shocked because he could feel that the surroundings were filled with endless power of heaven and earth. This was one of the main forces of a warrior's cultivation. However, none of the planets with life that Lu Feng had visited could compare to such a rich power of heaven and earth. Of all the places I've been to, only my teacher's inner world can surpass this place. The other places are far inferior. What is this place? Lu Feng could feel that this was not the immortal palace in Kuan Star, but an inner world like Dao Songtian's world. This place should be in the universe, because in this place the laws of heaven and earth still belonged to the most normal range. Not in a hurry to leave, Lu Feng hesitated for a moment before taking out a guardian crystal. Back then, the Grand Ancestor gave him 3 pieces, Dao Songtian gave him 3 pieces, and his father also gave him 1 piece. Previously in the Immortal Palace, it had already shattered into 2 pieces. So now, he only had 5 yuan left. Of course, there were 5 guardian crystals. Even those who had bestowed the guardian crystals were almighty figures like the virtual king, the virtual emperor. Almost no one in the entire universe could receive such treatment. Lu Feng took out the guardian crystal and finally shattered a piece. In an instant, the protective light screen appeared again. Layers of thin barriers completely protected Lu Feng's body. At this moment, although he did not have any combat strength bonus, Lu Feng could feel that even if a divine existence burned all of its power in an all-out attack, it would absolutely not be able to shake this thin barrier in the slightest. This was the guardian crystal bestowed to him by the Lu family's Grand Ancestor. It had been condensed by the Grand Ancestor. The Grand Ancestor was in existence on the level of the virtual king. Although Lu Feng did not know his level, he knew that the Lu family's Grand Ancestor was definitely a mighty figure in the galaxy. After all, the Lu family's second Grand Ancestor was the heavenly god of life and death. He was the most powerful demon who had fought against the last peerless divine king of mankind, the divine king. 1 second passed, 2 seconds. A few minutes passed. However, there was still no abnormality. In fact, Lu Feng did not feel any connection at all. He took a deep breath. There was a faint sense of disappointment in his eyes. However, Lu Feng quickly returned to his previous state. Since I can't contact him, then so be it. Anyway, my current strength is enough to protect myself. Unless a demigod makes a move, there won't be much danger at all. Lu Feng also knew that demigods were not considered the pinnacle of combat strength among the human race. Even so, there were not many demigods. Moreover, the human race was the race with the most powerhouses among the top races in the universe. Therefore, the chances of him encountering a demigod among the alien races were not high. As for the chances of a demigod making a move against him, the chances of him dying were even slimmer. Lu Feng did not leave immediately. He sat where he was. He wanted to think about what he had experienced over the past few days. According to everything that happened at the end, the Divine King of Chaos who left Kuan's star should still be the real Divine King of Chaos. Although he did many incomprehensible and crazy things at the end of his life, he is definitely the real him. Lu Feng began to slowly organize the things that he thought of. Back then, the Divine King of Chaos must have realized that there was something wrong with his martial path incarnation. That was why he came to the Supreme Immortal Palace. Only that place could withstand a confrontation at the level of the Divine King without collapsing. At the final moment, the Divine King of Chaos, as the main body, used the supreme power to completely suppress the King of Chaos and seal him in the Supreme Immortal Palace. The truth of everything should be just like that. There is no such thing as a divine king of the alien races. I'm afraid that this theory was spread by the Divine King of Chaos himself. He wanted to cover up the fact that his martial path incarnation had disappeared. However, there are still a few suspicious points. There was a kind of sobriety in his eyes. Although his strength was very weak, Lu Feng understood that his future was bound to be extremely terrifying. The Divine King was not his end. These things seemed unrelated, but if one were to look at it, they were actually closely related. Therefore, he had to properly organize the things that he knew to ensure that he would know the truth of everything in the future. The first suspicious point, which is also the biggest suspicious point, is the matter regarding the King of Chaos. Since ancient times, there have been countless existences who have condensed a martial path incarnation in human form. Many of them have even evolved their martial path incarnations to the extent that they could produce intelligence. However, I have never heard of a martial path incarnation betraying the main body. Yet, the King of Chaos betrayed. This is undoubtedly inconceivable. However, what made me even more suspicious was what he said. He said that he had awakened his own will and thoughts under his guidance. Then, who could that him be? To be able to have a relationship with the Divine King of Chaos, he must be at least an existence at the level of the Divine King. Moreover, he had the opportunity to awaken the Divine King of Chaos martial path incarnation. Then, it is very likely that he is related to the Divine King of Chaos to a certain extent. The Divine King of Chaos was the first supreme existence of the universe after my ancestor, the human king and the Emperor Divine King. He was the Divine King of the universe. In that era, other than the Divine King of Chaos, there was no other Divine King. Could it be that the Divine King of Chaos did not die? Was it him who did all these things? Lu Feng could guess that the first possibility was the Divine King of Chaos. After all the Divine Kings before the human king and the Emperor Divine King of Chaos did not escape the Divine King's curse. All of them mysteriously disappeared or died in the end. Of course, the Divine King of Chaos did not escape that peerless curse and disappeared in the end. However, he disappeared in the end and did not die. Therefore, it was still possible that he was the culprit. As for the human king's ancestor, that was absolutely impossible. Because if the human king's ancestor wanted to do something, he did not need to hide at all. He was so powerful that he did not need to set up any schemes. Moreover, the human king's ancestor was Lu Feng's ancestor. He did not believe that his great ancestor would do such a thing. Therefore, the greatest possibility that Lu Feng thought of was the Divine King of Chaos. However, why would the Divine King of Chaos do this? Could it be because of that peerless curse? The divine king of chaos did not have a good ending. This was the universe's greatest curse and the greatest secret of this epoch. Even the strongest divine king of this epoch and the primogenitor human king of chaos did not escape. They all disappeared in the end. It was obvious how terrifying this curse was. It was rumored that this curse was related to the destruction of the primordial immortal demon era. Otherwise, it could not have caused the destruction of so many divine kings of this epoch. The more he thought about it, the more incredulous and unimaginable it was. In the end, Lu Feng gave up helplessly. There were many things that he knew too little about. Even those pinnacle existences could not deduce, let alone him. Therefore, Lu Feng chose to give up. The second doubt lies with the divine king of chaos. Why did he become like that after the king of chaos betrayed him? It feels like he is afraid of something. Could it be that he knows the truth about the curse? Does he want to unite the many living divine kings to fight against the arrival of the curse? If that's really the case, then everything makes sense. Back then, the divine king of chaos was an incomparably powerful divine king. When facing a godly king expert from a foreign race, he had never spoken. He had always been suppressing and suppressing with incomparable force. However, in the later stages, ever since the king of chaos betrayed them, he seemed to have changed completely. He suppressed many experts of the human race and even did something he would never do before. He took the initiative to contact the god kings of many foreign races. Thinking of these possibilities, Lu Feng felt more and more that it was possible. However, these were only Lu Feng's guesses. After all, other than him, there was probably no one else in this world who knew about the King of Chaos. It's a pity that even someone as powerful as the Divine King of Chaos, a second-tier Divine King of Chaos, the supreme existence known as the Supreme of Time, could not escape. In the end, he disappeared completely. In an instant, Lu Feng felt a terrifying pressure. The overlords of the epoch were already the limit. The first divine king eventually disappeared and did not have a good ending. Apart from this overlord of the epoch, there was no news about the supreme experts who were as powerful as the human king and were known to be comparable to the ancient immortal and devil era. Apart from these two invincible existences, the number of other divine kings of the human race and foreign races' divine king that had fallen was also terrifying. Chapter 297. The number of fallen divine kings supreme and time supreme has reached an extreme number. Even in the past eras, the number of fallen divine kings supreme and time supreme is enough to shock the world. However, in the recent 10,000 years, they have fallen one by one and disappeared one after another. Who is the one who arranged all of this? Could it be in an instant? Lu Feng's eyes shone with a dazzling light. He seemed to have thought of something. However, the brilliance disappeared after a while. Lu Feng calculated the time. It was really wrong, really wrong. Although epic overlords can live for a long time, their peak lifespan is 1,000,000 years. Heavenly Master Hades and Great Demonic Sky Emperor existed hundreds of millions of years ago, during the initial period of this era. Even if they survived until now through secret techniques, they would definitely not be able to do such a huge thing. Moreover, even if they were able to maintain their peak combat power, it might be possible to kill those Universe Supremes and Time Supreme. However, it's absolutely impossible to make an overlord of an era suffer a tragic end. Moreover, the power of my ancestor human king is definitely not something an epic overlord can compare to. When he was at the second level of the divine king realm, he was already able to fight against an epic overlord from ancient times. However, after becoming an epic overlord and shattering the fighting power of the 33rd level of the taboo heaven, he is definitely not someone an epic overlord can compare to. Therefore, it is possible for those two Universe Supremes to exist, but the possibility is very, very low. Then, what is the truth behind all of this? Lu Feng felt that he was going crazy. All of this was too difficult to explain. He really could not think of any other possibilities. After going crazy for a while, Lu Feng finally calmed down. He knew that it was useless for him to go crazy. Moreover, this was not something he should be worried about. No matter how talented he was still very far away from becoming the Divine King Supreme. Moreover, if he really reached that stage, Lu Feng did not believe that he would definitely fail. After all, he possessed much more than his own primogeniture human monarch. Alright, the most important thing now is to figure out where I am. No matter what, I have to confirm my location and ensure my safety before I think about other things. Lu Feng stood up and started running in a direction. Lu Feng was not very afraid that others would know his identity as a human. In the current universe, all the major races interacted with each other. The race merchants were the clearest examples. Those pinnacle races interacted with each other very frequently. Even the underworld race, which was the most hostile to the human race, would not be in much danger unless one was a top figure of the human race. Otherwise, they would only be treated with hostility in the underworld race. In the capital administrative planet, in the heavenly city, I've seen the existence of many other races, and it's the same in planet Kuan. There were even many underworld tribe members among them. Since that's the case, as long as I'm careful in the other races, I'm afraid there won't be any big problems. Of course, this is under the premise that they do not know my identity. However, I think that there should be very few people who know my identity. I did not appear much during the battle in the massacre abyss. Moreover, the number of times I have appeared in public is limited. Moreover, I have been captured by the King of Chaos. I think many people know about this. Even if I appear in the midst of other races, it should not be too dangerous. Lu Feng understood that since even he knew that the one who had captured him was the Divine King, it was impossible that those pinnacle powerhouses of the Federation did not know. He believed that the news of him being captured could not be hidden from the Federation. He had been captured by a God King's supremacy. In the eyes of many people, he was undoubtedly dead. Therefore, now that Lu Feng had appeared in public, it should not be so coincidental that he would run into people who knew him. Therefore, Lu Feng did not care too much. His speed did not show any signs of slowing down. This trip took a total of 18 days. When the 18th day arrived, Lu Feng finally saw something that looked like a city. Although it was called a city, it was actually not that strict. This was because it looked like a city. The surrounding walls were thousands of meters high. It would not be an exaggeration to call such a city a divine city. However, Lu Feng actually sensed a lot of technological aura in this ancient city. He knew that this should be a city that combined technology and antiquity. As he stood in front of the city gate, which was over 10,000 meters long and several thousand meters high, Lu Feng took a deep breath. This was the biggest gate he had seen so far. Although it did not have any terrifying enhancements, just this gate alone gave off a shocking sense of majesty. After looking at it for a while, Lu Feng walked slowly towards the city gate. As he looked at the living beings coming and going in his surroundings, Lu Feng looked a little confused. The easiest way to determine where he lived was to look at the races that lived there. It was impossible for him to recognize all the billions of races in the universe. However, he could recognize all the more famous races. Among the races that had entered this place, Lu Feng recognized many of them. However, it was precisely because he recognized many of them that he felt puzzled. As Lu Feng thought, he could see the existence of other races in every peak race in the universe. However, the ratio was very distinctive. It was normal for a certain race to have a much larger population than the other races. However, the number of races that Lu Feng saw here was basically about the same. Of course, the races that Lu Feng was referring to were the peak Overlord races and the super first-rate races. Their ratios were not much different. They were almost the same. This made Lu Feng feel extremely strange. I've never heard of such a city that accommodates so many different races. Where is this place? Such a huge city was definitely famous in the entire universe. However, Lu Feng had never heard of it. Moreover, he had never heard of a city where all the major races lived together. With doubts in mind, Lu Feng still walked inside. The ancient streets of the city had traces of time mottled. It was very old and filled with a desolate aura. Around the streets there were also some extremely ancient and terrifying buildings that seemed to have gone through countless baptisms. However, among these ancient buildings, Lu Feng saw many modern buildings and equipment. Of course, this did not include suspension cars and so on. Lu Feng also understood this point. This was because he had already felt it when he came in. Here, no matter which race it was, they were all strong. The weakest had reached the intermediate warrior realm. As for the strong ones, Lu Feng even saw a perfect warrior. One had to know that among the peak races of the human race, a perfect warrior was one of the strongest existences on a second-class life planet. Of course, this was on the surface. Even so, it was terrifying enough. However, here, on the road, Lu Feng actually met one casually. Moreover, this perfect warrior did not have any noble attire at all. He was a strong warrior from the War God clan. He was wearing an ancient armor. Lu Feng felt a shocking murderous aura on the armor. He continued to walk inside with confusion. Finally, Lu Feng saw it. He saw a human. This was the first human he saw after entering here. Moreover, this human was really not simple. He was actually a warrior in the upheaval period. Without hesitation, Lu Feng walked directly towards the human. As a warrior in the upheaval period, his perception of the surroundings was extremely eye-catching. Moreover, Lu Feng didn't try to hide his intentions and walked straight towards him. Therefore, he naturally sensed it. In an instant, he cast his gaze on Lu Feng. The moment he saw that Lu Feng was also a human, a strange look flashed in his eyes. However, after a moment, this strange look was replaced by a cautious look. He waited quietly on the spot as if he was ready to take action at any time. However, Lu Feng did not show any abnormalities. He knew that in such a scene, even his own race had to be on guard. Moreover, even if this human warrior really misunderstood him and suddenly attacked, Lu Feng was not afraid at all. In the past, although he was still a peak evolution warrior, he was enough to contend with any high-level perfect period warrior. After the trip to the Immortal Palace, although he did not know why it appeared, he really obtained amazing benefit. The biggest benefit was the improvement of his martial path incarnation. With such a powerful martial path incarnation and countless combat skills hidden deep in his memory, Lu Feng believed that even a truly powerful peak perfect period warrior would not be able to do anything to him. Now, he was just an ordinary warrior in the upheaval period without the god's descendant bloodline, so Lu Feng naturally did not care too much. Finally, Lu Feng still came in front of the human. Just as the human warrior was about to attack, Lu Feng stopped and stretched out his hands, indicating that he had no malice. Seeing this, the warrior only stopped his plan to attack but did not relax in the slightest. Lu Feng smiled and said, "Senior, are you from the human race?" Hearing Lu Feng's question, the human race cultivator nodded slightly, but he still had a vigilant look on his face. Seeing that he was willing to talk to him, the smile on Lu Feng's face became even more obvious. "Actually, Senior, I don't have any malice. I just came here to ask you something." As if sensing Lu Feng's sincerity, the warrior's hostility slowly disappeared and his expression gradually eased. He said, "What do you want? Ask away. Since we are both humans, I will try my best to tell you." Lu Feng had to admit that at this moment, he finally realized the benefits of being a Tao-reaching realm cultivator. This time, if he had not slightly enhanced the special aura of a Tao-reaching realm cultivator, the human warrior would never have let down his guard so quickly. Senior, I would like to ask, where is this place? The moment he heard this, Lu Feng could clearly see the slight surprise in the human warrior's eyes. However, soon, the look in his eyes began to change and become confused. You said that you came here and you don't know where this is? You are not joking, right? This time, Lu Feng's smile turned into a slightly bitter smile. He nodded gently and said, Senior, I really don't know where this is. Previously, I encountered a teleportation formation and was inexplicably sent here. Lu Feng was not lying. He had indeed come here through a teleportation formation in the Immortal Palace. Moreover, Lu Feng also understood some things. On many planets there were similar teleportation portals. These portals were built by previous races or were left behind by powerhouses. In the Federation, there were often people who were inexplicably teleported away. There shouldn't be anything wrong with this statement. Sure enough, hearing this, the confusion in the human warrior's eyes disappeared slightly, and he nodded gently. Chapter 298. I didn't expect you to be so unlucky as to encounter such a space-time teleportation array. Forget it, it's too long to explain. We can't stay here any longer. Why don't you come with me to my house? I'll tell you slowly when we get there. After saying this, the human martialist took a step forward and walked in a certain direction. Seeing this, Lu Feng was stunned. He didn't think that this human martial artist would be so bold. In a situation where he didn't know anything, he actually invited a stranger to his home. This wouldn't happen even in the Federation, where there were laws. It seemed even more unbelievable here. However, Lu Feng did not hesitate too much. In the end, he followed the human race cultivator. I didn't expect that becoming a Taoist would have such benefit. It seems like I won't be able to survive in the future. I can rely on the aura of a Taoist to become a professional swindler. Lu Feng knew that if it weren't for the special blessing of a Taoist affecting this human martialist, he probably wouldn't have been able to get anything out of him. He wouldn't have been invited into the martialist's house so soon after meeting him. Lu Feng wasn't worried about whether this martialist was plotting something. He was confident that he could face a lot of things with his strength. Moreover, he still had 4 guardian crystals on him. Although these guardian crystals couldn't help him return to the human race, they could still help him block some sudden attacks. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't hesitate at all and left with the human martialist. Along the way, the human martialist introduced himself to Lu Feng. His name was Su Shuiyu, and he was indeed from the Federation. However, that was a long time ago. According to Su Shuiyu, he had been here for 80 years. During the introduction, Lu Feng naturally couldn't say that he was a descendant of the human king's Lu family. Moreover, he was afraid that someone would really remember him, so he made up a fake name. Now, his name was not Lu Feng but Futu. Of course, Lu Feng had chosen this name because of the sky-piercing Futu. After all, everything he had now was inseparable from the sky-piercing Futu in his consciousness space. When he heard this name, Su Shuiyu was also stunned. There were very few humans with such strange names. He wasn't an idiot and naturally understood that Lu Feng was hiding his identity. However, this was a personal secret. In such a place, hiding one's identity wasn't a big deal. Therefore, since Lu Feng said so, he would address him as such. By the time the two finished their introductions, they had already arrived at Su Shuiyu's house. Brother Futu, this is your big brother Su's home. How is it? Not bad, right? Having a huge residence in City 37 is also a symbol of status. Su Shuiyu pointed at the luxurious villa in front of him, which occupied an area of 1 kilometer, as he introduced it proudly. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. This residence was several times bigger than Lu Feng's home in the Cymbidium. It was also much more luxurious. However, compared to the status of a martialist during the upheaval period, this was a little shabby. After all, a martialist during the upheaval period would be considered the strongest on a planet like the Cymbidium. It was only right for them to have a villa. However, since this big brother had introduced it this way, Lu Feng naturally felt embarrassed to deny anything. Su Xueyu seemed to have noticed the slight hesitation in Lu Feng's eyes. He laughed and patted his head lightly. I forgot. You just arrived here and don't know the situation here, so it's only right that you don't know. Let's go in. I'll tell you about the situation here. Along the way, Lu Feng made use of his advantage as a Dao-reaching realm cultivator to get along well with Su Xueyu. They even called each other brothers. Seeing Su Xueyu's enthusiasm, Lu Feng also laughed heartily and followed Su Xueyu into the house. From the outside, this villa looked very luxurious. The layout inside made Lu Feng's eyes shine. This place was different from those ancient buildings. It had a modern atmosphere. It was full of the smell of all kinds of technology. It could be said that the layout of this place was several grades better than Lu Feng's home in the Cymbidium. It was almost comparable to Mu Shuiyan's family villa. After letting Lu Feng sit on a top water sofa, Su Xueyu went to get something to drink for Lu Feng. Soon, Su Xueyu returned with 2 bottles of sparkling liquid in his hands. Brother Futu, this is the sky green wine, one of the specialties of the sky green race. This thing is very difficult to obtain in the Federation. It can only be obtained here. But to get this thing, the cost is not small. After saying this, he directly handed the wine in his hand to Lu Feng. Lu Feng didn't hesitate at all when he received it. He opened it right away and drank it in one gulp. The sky green wine didn't feel anything at first. However, after a while, Lu Feng's eyes lit up slightly. This was because he had finally experienced the wonders of the sky green wine. This is good stuff. This sky green wine is really good stuff. It actually makes one's mind clear and gives one an illusion of enlightenment. Su Shuyu's eyes lit up when he heard Lu Feng's praise for the sky green wine. He then said proudly, "Of course, don't be fooled by the fact that this is just an ordinary drink. I spent nearly 10,000 divine item points just to buy a small bottle of it." Divine item points? Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. Upon seeing this scene, Su Xueyu also came to a realization. I forgot to explain it to you. Brother, since this is your first time here, let me give you a proper introduction. Upon hearing this, Lu Feng became serious. He knew that he would be living here for a period of time. Furthermore, what he was going to say next would affect how he would return to the human race. You should have seen it when you came here. You can see all kinds of races here, but it didn't say which race has the most population. Lu Feng nodded gently. Actually, this isn't just the case in city number 37. It's the same in the hundreds of surrounding cities. The place you are in is called the Green Mist region. It is one of the 37 regions under the Wind God region. The Wind God region is one of the 5 unoccupied regions in the extraterritorial battlefield. For a moment, Lu Feng's eyes narrowed slightly, and he interrupted Su Xueyu. Big Brother Su, are you saying that this is the extraterritorial battlefield? Lu Feng's voice was slightly distorted. He hadn't expected that he would actually be transported here. He had been transported to the battlefield of the various races, the extraterritorial battlefield. Su Xueyu nodded gently and said, "This is the extraterritorial battlefield." In an instant, Lu Feng sank into deep thought. Su Xueyu didn't disturb Lu Feng. Instead, he quietly savored the sky green wine in his hand. At the moment, Lu Feng's mind started to churn rapidly. The information he had read about the extraterritorial battlefield flashed through his mind continuously. The extraterritorial battlefield, as its name suggested, was a battlefield, an ancient battlefield where the various races fought. The extraterritorial battlefield was a special place. It was vast and could almost match the size of the entire Milky Way. Moreover, the most peculiar thing about the extraterritorial battlefield was that despite its size, it wasn't made up of countless planets with life. Instead, it was a complete continent, a world. One could imagine how frightening it was to have a continent the size of the Milky Way. According to legends, the extraterritorial battlefield was formed countless eras ago. Every time there was a great calamity, everything in the universe would be destroyed. Even those stars and black holes couldn't escape. However, the extraterritorial battlefield had existed since ancient times. It had experienced countless calamities, and yet it hadn't been destroyed in the slightest. Of course, the main reason wasn't because the extraterritorial battlefield had any special protection, but because of its location. The extraterritorial battlefield didn't normally exist in the universe's spacetime. The area it existed in was very strange and could even be described as terrifying. This was because it existed in an alternate spacetime. The only way to connect the extraterritorial battlefield to the outside world, other than these strange transportation arrays, was through black holes. Not all black holes could be connected through black holes. Only the black holes in the largest black hole cluster in the universe, the Dylan Black Hole Cluster, were connected to this place. Of course, only the virtual king could resist the terrifying pressure and gravitational force of the black holes. However, after countless years of development, many existences used various divine items to construct a kind of tunnel. Although this kind of tunnel couldn't ignore the existence of the black holes, it could reduce the gravitational force and pressure of the black holes to the lowest level. If they wanted to pass by themselves, even a venerable one would be able to do so. This was the only information Lu Feng had about the extraterritorial battlefield in his mind. After thinking through everything, Lu Feng looked at Su Shuyu and said, "Big brother Su, I was a little surprised when I heard that I came here. It's okay now. You can continue." Seeing that Lu Feng was able to recover from his shock so quickly, Su Shuyu had a look of admiration in his eyes. He didn't hesitate and continued, "You should know about the extraterritorial battlefield, right?" Lu Feng nodded gently. Su Shuyu continued, "The extraterritorial battlefield can be said to be a chaotic place of slaughter. Here, any existence with some ability will come here. Almost all the Divine King powerhouses of the major races have come here to train. Of course, they didn't come here just to find opponent. More importantly, they wanted to obtain the amazing resources here. The extraterritorial battlefield is the only ancient battlefield that hasn't been affected by the Great Calamity and has always existed. Countless eras ago, it was the place where the creatures fought. Therefore, countless treasures have fallen here. Those were all left behind by the powerhouses of the various races. Of course, even without those treasures, this is still an exceptionally suitable place for us to grow. The chi of heaven and earth here is too dense. Countless divine items of the universe have been born here, and their quality is even higher. Therefore, from the moment this place was discovered, all the major races have done their best to occupy every inch of this place. Lu Feng could imagine this. The divine items of the universe produced in the time realm had supported the Federal University to become a universe-level pinnacle power. The extraterritorial battlefield was billions of times larger than the time realm, so its value was needless to say. Chapter 299. There are three main characteristics of the foreign battlefield. The first is the weapons, treasures, elixirs and cultivation techniques left behind by countless powerhouses. The second is the universe divine items that are produced naturally. The third is the acceleration of time. His eyes were slightly stunned, and a strange expression appeared on his face. The time realm. When he heard Lu Feng mention the time realm, Su Shuiyu's expression didn't change in the slightest. Ever since he had seen Lu Feng, He had been thinking about Lu Feng's identity. After this short period of interaction and his observation of Lu Feng, Su Xueyu understood that Futu was definitely not a simple person. He was most likely a descendant of a big family of the human race. Therefore, when he saw that Lu Feng knew about the time realm, he didn't find it strange at all. He nodded slightly and said affirmatively, "That's right, it is the time realm." Of course, the time realm here is much worse than the one controlled by the human race's federal university and the Federation government. The realm of time here had a maximum acceleration of 10 times. Moreover, in order to accelerate time once, one would need a large number of divine items. It can be said that even an ordinary divine being would not be able to continue cultivating in a time realm that is more than 5 times faster. Lu Feng nodded slightly. He had already thought of this point. If time could be accelerated unscrupulously, then the supremes of the human race would have already descended here and fought over it frantically. I have been here for 80 years, but I have only entered the time realm twice during this period. Plus, the total time added together is only 2 years. For the past 2 years, I've been using it to break through my bottleneck. The increase in speed is only threefold. However, the cost of these 2 times and 3 times faster consumed almost half of my savings. Lu Feng took a deep breath. He had been in the foreign battlefield for 80 years. Even though he was an upheaval martialist, he had only entered twice and accelerated time for 2 years. Moreover, it had been 3 times faster. Half of his savings had actually been used up. This was really too terrifying. "Oh right, Big Brother Su, I heard you mention something about a divine item spot. What is that?" Vaguely, Lu Feng had already guessed it. He understood that divine item points should be a common currency similar to Federation coins. However, this currency could only be circulated here. Sure enough, what Su Xueyu said was the same as what Lu Feng thought. These god item points are the currency used in the outer realm battlefield. Although the currency of any race could still be used here, it was not very useful. This place was universally recognized as the divine item point. In every city, there is an organization where you can exchange for divine item points. As long as you head there, you can exchange for them. You can exchange for anything there. Of course, the most popular one is the divine items. Otherwise, how could it be called a divine item point? The useless god items, equipment, and elixirs that you obtained can be exchanged for god item points. Of course, if you need any divine items, you can use these points to exchange for them. In those time realms, divine items are clearly marked with prices. It can be said that the use of divine item points here is greater than that of Federation coins in the Federation. Of course, in addition to the exchange, you can also do some missions, join some organizations, or directly help the top races fight for territory. However, I don't recommend that you earn these things. After all, to do these things you need to be extremely powerful. Furthermore, if you are not careful, you will be in danger of dying. If you want to obtain divine item points, the most convenient and safest way is to help with some routine missions or take a little risk to search for some divine items and relics left behind by those powerhouses. Lu Feng nodded slightly. However, he quickly thought of something and asked, "In that case, who is the one who sets the exchange rate for divine item points?" Lu Feng was very concerned about this. He also knew that if there was no stable exchange organization, it would cause terrible chaos. Seeing Lu Feng's expression, Su Xueyu knew what Lu Feng was thinking. He laughed again and patted Lu Feng's shoulder gently. "Brother Futu, don't worry about this. The exchange rate for divine item points is set by 3 major organizations and 1 major race. They are the gods, the master gods, the pantheon, and the top race in the universe, the emperor race. I think you can rest assured about this." Lu Feng nodded slightly. He already knew about the existence of the god. It was an organization formed by the human race and the war god race. The other master gods and the pantheon were organizations formed by the other major races. As for the emperor race, Lu Feng also had a certain understanding. Currently, the number of powerhouses in the human race was enough to be the largest in the entire universe. However, their peak combat power was still not comparable to the emperor race, the top race in the world. After all, on the surface, the emperor race had 2 divine king powerhouses. However, no one dared to think about how terrifying they were in the dark. The top powerhouse in the world was the current patriarch of the emperor race's Sakra lineage, who was also the current divine king Sakra. The 3 most powerful organizations in the universe and the top race had joined forces. No wonder they could ensure fairness, safety, and reliability. At this point, Lu Feng finally knew where he was and some basic information about his location. At this time, he also understood why he couldn't summon the Great Ancestor when he shattered the Guardian Crystal. His mind became slightly active. Lu Feng continued to ask, "Then, Brother Su, how can I leave this place?" Su Shuyu was silent for a moment. After a long time, he slowly said, "The passages to leave this place are all controlled by the major races. If you want to leave, you have to pay a lot of money. Moreover, your identity must be strictly verified. Of course, if the human race wants to leave, the cost will be much lower. However, Fudu, if you want to use the human race's passage to leave, don't think about it for now." Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. He looked at Su Shuyu, waiting for his explanation. A month ago, the human race and the underworld race started a fierce battle in this foreign battlefield. Now, the border is under martial law. If you want to pass, it will be extremely dangerous. Lu Feng nodded gently. Indeed, if the border was under martial law, it would be difficult to leave. After all, this was a time of war. The human race and the underworld race are mortal enemies. I understand this. However, I heard that the 2 races haven't clashed for a long time. But why did there have to be a collision again? Hearing Lu Feng's question, Su Shuyu sighed softly. With a strange expression, he looked out the window. After a long time, his voice slowly came. "Isn't all this because of one person? What kind of person had such great influence that he could make the 2 races go to war? That person is a monster of the human race. He is even an invincible monster. It is said that a month ago, that monster was killed by the divine king of the other race. As for that divine king, the human race speculated that he was the divine king of the underworld race. Originally, a genius isn't much. Death was death. It was impossible to cause such a collision. However, this monster is different from the past. He is the current young master of the Lu family. It is said that he is the hope of the human race's revival in this era. According to the human race, it is certain that he will enter the divine king's territory. Think about it. A divine king with the bloodline of the human king. How terrifying would that be? If he really reaches the supreme realm, I'm afraid he will have the ability to fight or even defeat the number 1 supreme in the world, the divine King Dishi. No wonder the human race and the Lu family are so crazy. Hearing this, Lu Feng already knew who the monster that Su Shuyu was talking about was. He didn't expect that this war was caused by him. This made Lu Feng stunned. Seeing Lu Feng's expression, Su Shuyu thought that Lu Feng was just shocked by this news. After all, it was unthinkable that a single genius could cause a war between 2 races. Heavenly God Jialan could cause a war between the 2 races, but it wasn't because of him. Most importantly, it was because of the collision between the Nether King and the Divine King. Lu Tao, the god-slaying Lu Tao, was said to be the most talented human in the past 500 years. But even someone as powerful as him, when the underworld king progenitor destroyed his path to becoming a god king, the human race wasn't as shaken as it was now. I didn't expect this Lu Feng to do it. This time, the human king and the Lu family also sent their disciples and many ancestor-level figures here. Apart from the human king bloodline, even the mysterious Federal University, which has never intervened in any battles, did the same. It can be said that the fall of Lu Feng directly caused the top three forces of the human race to be shaken. At the moment, Lu Feng was silent. An endless silence. Amidst this silence, there was also a touched expression. He didn't expect that his family and the Federal University would make such a crazy decision because of him. Looking at Lu Feng's silent expression, Su Shuiyu continued to laugh. He said, "Brother Futu, I'm afraid such a monstrous genius will only appear once every few thousand years. Coupled with the fact that he has the bloodline of the human king, it is only natural that so many forces would take action. Don't think too much about it. After all, in the past few thousand years, he was the only one who could cause a war because of one person." Lu Feng, who was awakened by Su Shuiyu's laughter, smiled and nodded. "Brother Futu, I know that you are definitely hiding something from me. Of course, it's normal to hide something in this foreign battleground. Big brother, I don't blame you. It's just that I think I have to tell you. You aren't a disciple of an aristocratic family here, and you don't have an illustrious identity. Therefore, keeping a low profile is fundamental. If you want to go home, then wait until this battle is almost over. Big brother will think of a way to send you back. You must not rush in casually. Do you understand?" As he spoke, his expression became extremely solemn. Seeing Su Shuiyu's serious expression warmed Lu Feng's heart. No matter what, he still nodded deeply. Seeing Lu Feng agree, Su Shuiyu also revealed a happy expression. He didn't know why, but he had lived in the foreign battleground for more than 80 years. Towards other people, he should be unusually cautious. However, towards this Futu brother whom he had only met for a few hours and did not even know his real name, he had a kind of concern from the bottom of his heart. It was precisely because of this that he took out the sky-clear wine and even advised Lu Feng not to take any risk. "Brother Futu, it's getting late now. You should rest first. Big brother will take you around tomorrow to appreciate the scenery of the foreign battleground." Chapter 300. Lu Feng spent the whole night thinking. Early the next morning, he was woken up by Su Shuiyu. "Let's go, brother. I'll take you around today and introduce you to my brothers. After all, you have to stay here until the war between the human race and the underworld race ends." After saying this, he left the villa before Luo Yunyang. Seeing brother Su in such a hurry, Lu Feng could only smile helplessly and follow him closely. Their first stop was the exchange center. He brought Lu Fenglai here to help Lu Feng get an identity card. After all, if Lu Feng wanted to survive in the outland battlefield, an identity card was indispensable if he wanted to exchange for things. The outland battlefield was a chaotic battlefield. War was the mainstream here. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called the outland battlefield. It was very easy to get an identity card here. Of course, this was only limited to the first one. After entering, Lu Feng was given an electronic form. Lu Feng filled in the form according to the instructions on it. The application for an identity card was completed. Holding Lu Feng's identity card, Su Shuiyu's eyes shone with surprise. "Brother Futu, I didn't expect you to be a peak genius. In the Federation, you are at least a genius at the Federation level. I didn't expect you to be a psychic. When I first saw you, I thought you were a warrior. No wonder I couldn't sense your level. You are a psychic. That's easy to understand." Lu Feng filled in his level as a peak advanced psychic. He didn't write his age as 18 years old. After all, a peak advanced psychic at 18 years old was a little too scary. Lu Feng's age was shown to be 20 years old. A 20-year-old psychic master at the peak of the advanced level was still terrifying, but in comparison, however, it was still acceptable. Lu Feng chose to be a psychic because he wanted to protect himself better. since the war between the two races had started because of him. In that case, his fame would definitely increase by a lot. If he chose to be a psychic, no one would suspect him. After all, almost no one knew that he was a psychic. Furthermore, these people would never have imagined that he, a descendant of the human monarch Lu family, would be a psychic master. Furthermore, Lu Feng did not fill in as a warrior because he had his own confidence. Lu Feng's recent experiences had allowed him to take a step further on the path of becoming a Dao entrant. Back then, unless one was a demigod, they wouldn't have been able to tell his martialist level. And now, without the strength of a god, it was even more impossible. In this foreign battlefield, the existence of gods was also incomparably noble. They belonged to the kind of existence that was elusive. As long as he was careful, it wouldn't be so easy to encounter them. Hearing Su Shuiyu's praise, Lu Feng only smiled slightly. Big brother Zhao, my talent as a psychic isn't bad, right? Before I came here, I was a specially enrolled student at the Federal University General Hospital. On this point, Lu Feng did not lie. His status as a specially enrolled student was something he had fought for himself. Although he had not officially entered the Federal University to study even once. Not bad, not bad. Really not bad. During this period of time, I will go out on a few missions. If I find anything suitable for a psychic's cultivation, I will definitely keep it for you. Hearing this, Lu Feng did not argue. He nodded his head lightly and heavily. Lu Feng understood Su Shuiyu's character. This was a cautious martialist, but also a forthright one. Once he had decided on someone, he would treat that person with all his heart. Without a doubt, he had already decided on Lu Feng. Su Shuiyu had already decided that Lu Feng was his Futu brother. I have nothing to do these few days, so I will take you along to meet my brothers. In the future, if you are willing to come along, I will take you on adventures and missions. Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded his head hurriedly. He had come here to improve his strength. Although he could not return for the time being, Lu Feng's desire to improve his strength would not change. Furthermore, Lu Feng felt that this foreign battlefield was even more suitable for him. He was already considered a top-notch existence within the Human Federation. He had the authority of the human King Lu family, which was equivalent to that of a patriarch. Even the patriarchs of those super families would not dare to throw a tantrum when they saw him. In such an environment, it would be extremely difficult for him to fight and improve. His cultivation technique, the Great Demon True Body, focused on endless trials and tribulations, as well as breakthroughs on the brink of life and death. If he lost the struggle between life and death, then his cultivation speed would definitely be extremely slow. In this foreign battlefield, he could already let go of everything and unleash himself to his heart's content. He could fight without restraint. In Lu Feng's eyes, this foreign battlefield was really the most suitable place for him. He took out his identification card and said something to it. Soon, the two of them walked in a certain direction. The Sky Network could not be used in this foreign battlefield. If they wanted to communicate, they would need to use some more conventional communication devices. In addition to being a memory card to prove one's identity, the identification card also had another use, which was for communication purposes. It could be said that the identification card was a simplified version of the Sky Network in the foreign battlefield. The two of them did not leave for long. After making a few turns, they stopped. The place they had arrived at was a vast hall. However, this place was filled with countless people. Many powerhouses from the various top clans and the more powerful first-rate clans had gathered here. Upon seeing this scene, Lu Feng understood that this should be the place where Su Shuiyu had mentioned to accept missions. Sure enough, Su Shuiyu looked at Lu Feng and introduced, "Brother Futu, this is the trading center. Here, you can exchange sacred items that you do not need for sacred item points. You can also use the sacred item points to exchange for things that you need. Furthermore, there will be information about trading missions appearing here from time to time. All these years, the few of us have been trading here. Lu Feng nodded in understanding. Let's wait for a while. I've already informed a few of my friends. They'll be back soon. I'll introduce you to them then. Of course, Lu Feng had no objections to this. To him, it was good to get to know more people. Moreover, the fact that they could be acknowledged by Brother Su already proved that there was no problem with their character. The two of them found a table and sat down. After waiting for a while, Lu Feng saw 4 people walking over. There were 4 people, not 4 creatures. This was because they were all from the human race. There were very few differences between races in the foreign battlefield. However, most of the small groups here were made up of people from the same race. After all, people from the same race were more reliable than people from other races. Seeing the 4 of them enter, Su Shuiyu stood up and shouted, indicating for them to come over. Very quickly, the group of 4 walked over to them. Looking at the arrival of these 4 humans, Lu Feng could not help but sigh. He had already seen through the strength of these 4 people, and he had even seen through most of their details. There were 3 men and 1 woman who came. Among them, the tallest human was at the peak of the upheaval stage. Among the other 3, the older one and the only woman were at the upheaval stage of the middle stage. These were nothing. However, what really caught Lu Feng's attention was the last young man. Lu Feng could sense that he was only around 22 or 23 years old. His strength had already reached the upheaval stage of the beginner stage. There was no doubt that a 22 or 23-year-old warrior at the upheaval stage was a true genius. Although he wasn't at the level of a monster, he was terrifying enough. Moreover, the most eye-catching one was this young man. Because he wasn't simply at the upheaval stage of the beginner stage. His strength was far from what could be shown by his level. Because he had the bloodline of the god descendant. The 4 of them quickly arrived in front of Lu Feng and Su Shuiyu. They smiled and greeted Su Shuiyu, then focused their attention on Lu Feng. Before coming, Su Shuiyu had already informed these people of Lu Feng's situation, so they already knew about Lu Feng. The tallest and most powerful man was obviously the leader of these people. He smiled at Lu Feng, stretched out his hand, and said in the Federation's human clan's etiquette, "You must be Futu. I just heard about you from Big Brother Su. Hello, my name is Zhou Yuan." Lu Feng didn't hesitate. He smiled and stretched out his hand, shaking the arm full of power. "Hello, Big Brother Zhou Yuan. In the future, I'll need you to take care of me." Zhou Yuan didn't try to sound him out. Perhaps he had already heard from Su Shuiyu that Lu Feng was a psychic. Therefore, he and Lu Feng just touched each other's hand lightly. Then, the older middle-aged man also walked over. He also stretched out his hand and said, "Li Kong, Futu, welcome." It was a very simple 6 words. Through this simple contact, Lu Feng could see that this Li Kong was a very direct and decisive person. From him, Lu Feng could also feel a strong killing intent. He knew that this Li Kong must be a person who had been tempered by endless battles. "Thank you." Lu Feng admired this kind of person the most, so he didn't say anything more. He also stretched out his hand and shook it. As if he felt the aura on Lu Feng's body was similar to his own, Li Kong showed a look of approval when he shook hands with Lu Feng. After the two got to know each other, the only woman of the 4 came over. She was a beautiful woman. Although she wasn't the best, because she was a cultivator, she had a resolute aura that ordinary women didn't have. This made her temperament even more eye-catching. Looking at Lu Feng with a kind smile, the woman stretched out her hand and said, "My name is Chaimo, little brother Lu Feng, welcome." Seeing her bright eyes, Lu Feng knew that this Chaimo wasn't a simple person. In fact, Lu Feng understood after a little thought. No one who could survive in this foreign battlefield was simple. Seeing the two constantly waving their hands, Su Shuiyu laughed and said, I say, little sister Chamo, my brother Futu is a young and handsome man. Remember to ask your husband to take care of him. Hearing this, Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. Chamo, on the other hand, laughed heartily and looked at Zhou Yuan with deep affection. Lu Feng immediately understood what was going on. This Chamo should be a couple with Zhou Yuan. Sure enough, Zhou Yuan directly said, of course. Li Kai was the youngest before, and now there's finally someone younger. Moreover, he's the only psychic among us. If we don't take care of him, who will we take care of? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.